Chapter 427. Riker raised his head and looked at Wuming. After a few seconds, Riker understood. Wuming had said before that the Star Cup was formed when the strongest person appeared. The Elf Corridor bred various gods, so it was inferred that the Elf Corridor was the strongest person. In that case, the representative would explode and the Elf Corridor would appear. With the appearance of the strongest person, the Star Cup would definitely appear. When the time comes, I will go and meet the god of war Artesius. As for you, you will be responsible for piercing the core of this planet and revealing the Elf Corridor. When the Star Cup appears, you will obtain the Star Cup. This way, the battle for the sole god on this planet will end. Wuming spoke Riker's mind and pointed out that Riker should obtain the Star Cup. Hey! Wait a minute, why me? As a god, isn't it better for you to obtain the Star Cup? Riker said with some surprise. In fact, until now, Riker had not completely believed in Wuming. He really wanted to end this war, so even if the god in front of him wanted to become the sole god, Riker had no objections. Then I'm sorry, I have no intention of becoming the sole god of this planet. Wuming shrugged his shoulders with a half smile and half helplessly. This world was not one he was familiar with. It could be said that except for Riker and Zaybrook, Wuming did not know anyone else. To become the sole god of this planet, there was no doubt that he would have to live and die with the planet. Wuming did not have the time for that. Although Wuming was benevolent, he was not a saint. It was impossible for him to spend too much effort on this world. There were other worlds that needed Wuming's help more. Perhaps Wuming would come back to visit in the future, but he would definitely not become the sole god and ruler of this planet. In addition, I still have to fight 2 rounds with Artesius. Otherwise, if the strongest god of war snatches the Star Cup, it will be troublesome, Wuming said seriously. And the main reason why I'm not going to get the Star Cup is that I'm not a native of this world, so it's very likely that I won't be able to hold the Star Cup. It's better to leave it to you. Wuming patted Rick's shoulder. Rick was silent for a moment before he nodded. Yes, leave it to me. Wuming and Rick smiled at each other, their eyes filled with hope. This made Hubert Lutz tilt his head and look at the two strangely. Yes, but the power of humans alone is unable to penetrate the core and reveal the Elven Corridor, Zaybrook said expressionlessly. In truth, it was not just humans. Even other races, such as the dragon spirits and the skywings, would barely be able to pierce through the Earth's core with their own strength. No, it would be impossible for them to do so. Meanwhile, the forest goblin's Zeroth protection of the void and the goblin's marrow explosion relied on magic spells and magical technological products. They didn't need to pierce through the Earth's core, unless there was the help of a god. However, if the dragon spirit race's collapsing whistle, the skywing race's sky strike, the forest spirit race's Zeroth void barrier, the goblin race's marrow explosion, and other sure-kill abilities of the various races were combined, and with the help of the gods, the Earth's core could be easily opened. But at that time, the planet would be almost finished. However, as long as one became the only god, they would immediately activate their authority to restore the planet. Then, there would be no problem. Wuming thought so from the beginning, and Rick also thought of this after knowing about the marrow explosion and the Zeroth protection of the void. At that time, I'll help you with the matter of correcting the attacks. I'll definitely make those combined attacks hit the target. Wuming showed an expression of victory. I'll leave the rest to you, Rick. I'll obediently wait for your victory on the corpse of a god. Wuming squatted down and patted Hubert's head. Then he turned to Rick and said, "Don't worry. If it's you, it should be possible," Wuming teased. Facing Wuming's distrustful question, Rick smiled. "Leave it to me. I'll end this game." Now, Rick showed an unprecedented smile. This was a smile from the bottom of his heart. "Ah, by the way, Rick, I have something to ask of you," Wuming suddenly said. "What's the matter?" Rick looked at Wuming in confusion. "This child and I want to enter the life of you humans and experience life. Allow me to refuse." Before we finished, Rick interrupted Wuming's words. "How can you do it so neatly?" Wuming smiled. Rick looked at Wuming with melancholy, then looked at Hubert, who was a Kikai race. "If it's you, Lord God, there's no problem. After all, Wu Ming's appearance looked like a human, and his speech and behavior were consistent with a human's. But Hubert's was. Rick looked at Hubert helplessly. Hubert tilted his head and looked at Rick in confusion. Hidden under the cloak is a mechanical body, stiff and lifeless, and a mechanical tone. Without a doubt, she is a Kikai race. Even if she disguises herself, once she enters the life of us humans, she will be easily exposed. You know how afraid humans are of other races in this era. If we don't chase her away, we won't be able to live a normal life. I clearly understood what Rick meant. Actually, Hubert had to disguise herself as an ordinary human girl, and no one could find out. After entering the human society, Hubert was destined to have more contact with people. This way, it was only a matter of time before she was exposed. In other words, it's fine as long as no one finds out, right? Wu Ming smiled. Well, that's what you say, but I don't think that a Kikai race can hide her identity. Rick touched his chin and looked at the items on Hubert's body. Data flowed through his eyes, a glowing disc on his right forehead that looked like a magic formation, a pair of wings on his back, and two tail-like threads near his tailbone that connected to the sprites. The Kikai race without a sprite was like a car without gasoline. It was useless. Then what about now? Wu Ming smiled. Then, through the hand on Hubert's head, Wu Ming transferred his magic power to Hubert's body, or rather, the art on Hubert's body. In an instant, Hubert's body lit up. It was so bright that Rick couldn't open his eyes. When the light gradually dissipated, Rick opened his eyes. Eh? Rick looked at the little girl standing beside Wu Ming in shock. Rose-colored hair, tattered clothes, no wings, no tail, no disc on her forehead, and with those big watery amber eyes, she was simply adorable. This should be fine, right? Wu Ming looked at Rick with a smile. If that's the case, because... Rick smiled awkwardly. Then, let's play a game. Wu Ming smiled. Chapter 428. Checkmate. Zayubrek said calmly. She picked up the chess piece created by Wu Ming's magic and killed Rick directly. It's cheating to let Jikai's seed play chess. Rick sighed helplessly as he looked at his chess piece that couldn't be more dead. This is a fair game. You have to abide by the rules, Rick, Wu Ming, who was sitting on the side and watching the game in boredom, said with a gloating smile. Damn it. You actually let Jikai's seed play chess with me. There should be a limit to cheating. Rick muttered helplessly. Okay, didn't you agree to it before? If Zayubrek wins, let her join the lives of humans. You have to accept your loss, Rick. You have to accept your loss, Zayubrek also said expressionlessly. That's right. Rick was excited because he saw chess that he hadn't seen for a long time. Then he agreed to the game and lost completely. After all, how could a human brain compare to a machine? Of course, there were exceptions, but this exception wasn't Rick. I know. I'll let Zayubrek join our lives. You said before that you wanted to join us. Then, I'll have to trouble you to look after her. Don't let her cause any trouble, Rick said helplessly. Through the exchange just now, Rick also knew the name of this Jikai seed. I'll try my best. Wu Ming looked at Rick with a smile and said irresponsible words. Sigh. Rick sighed helplessly. These two guys were indeed non-humans. If they turned into humans, they would definitely be problem children. That's right, Rick suddenly said. The name Zayubrek doesn't sound like a human's. And this tone. If you don't change it, it might leave suspicion in the crowd, Rick said earnestly. In this kind of era, not only was Rick suspicious, but the other ordinary people were also suspicious. If they saw something, the refugees would be in a panic. Rick believed in Wu Ming and also believed in Zayubrek, who was captured by Wu Ming, but this didn't mean that others could believe them. So, if it was possible, can you get Hublets to change it? Asked Leave. Are you all right, Hubrek? Wu Ming patted Hubrek's little head, looking at him. Answer, there's no problem. Zayubrek felt Wu Ming's head patting and was stunned for a moment before he nodded. Then, first, remove the mechanical word at the beginning of the sentence, and then change the character to be timid and quiet. Is that okay? Wu Ming asked softly. Hubert nodded and closed his eyes. After a few seconds, Hubrek opened his eyes again. Okay. When Zybrek spoke again, it wasn't the same emotionless voice as before. Instead, it was the timid voice of a human girl that was mixed with cuteness. With Wuming's magic, Zybrek was no different from an ordinary, timid human girl. Well done, Zybrek. Wuming gently patted Zybrek's head as if he was facing his own sister. As for the names, you'll be called Shiobi from now on, and I'll be your brother, Villo. Remember that. Wuming treated Shiobi gently as if he had really become a brother. Shiobi. Remember. Rick raised his eyebrows as he looked at the two people who were acting like crazy. Until now, I still feel that you superior races really have too much of an advantage, Rick said in confusion. However, Wuming understood. Wasn't Rick referring to the series of tricks that Wuming and Zybrek had used? Although humans are weak, the spirit that they possess is something that non-human races like us can't compare to. I think that as the leader of the humans, you must also understand this principle. Wuming's words made Rick laugh. Well, that's true. Then, it's almost time for us to go back. With that, Rick began to walk towards the stairs. Rick, I have some unfortunate news for you. Wuming suddenly called out to Rick. Huh? Rick stopped and turned around to look at Wuming in confusion. What is it? The weather outside is a little bad. Wuming revealed a mischievous smile. In the outside world, countless elven skeletons were like a snowstorm, wreaking havoc on the earth. Suddenly, a shadow flew out from the snowstorm. They were Rick, who was fully armed and riding the creature, and Shiobi, who was flying at full speed with Rick and the creature in his hands. Wah! Rick's scream was heard. About a few minutes later, Shiobi stopped and put the half-dead Rick and the equally half-dead creature on the ground. We're here, Shiobi said softly. I can't take it anymore. Rick weakly lay on the ground and said faintly. The creature had already fainted. Suddenly, a black door like a black hole appeared, and Wuming's figure appeared from inside. Yo, Rick, are you okay? Wuming looked at Rick lying on the ground with a mischievous smile and greeted him. Damn it. With such a convenient method, why did you let me fly back while being carried by Shiobi? Rick raised his hand and asked. Teleportation door, because this door only allows me to pass through, so there's no other way. Wuming said with a smile. Of course, this statement was wrong. He simply wanted to see Rick suffer to satisfy his own mischievous interest. When Wuming, Shiobi, and Rick were preparing to leave the underground laboratory of the forest elves, Wuming discovered the situation outside in advance. According to Rick, it was a death ash storm. As mentioned before, the elven skeletons were like rain and snow when the weather changed, so it wasn't impossible for a situation similar to a blizzard to occur. Although Wuming used the excuse of, with my defensive tactic, there's no need to worry at all, to let Shiobi directly carry Rick and his horse back here. It had to be said that the horse was coincidentally hidden by Rick and was able to avoid the death ash storm. It should be known that ordinary humans would be completely corroded in a few seconds under such a death ash storm. The elven skeletons were just that terrifying. Speaking of which, your tactic is quite useful. Rick checked his divine body and was really fine. Not only that, but his horse was also fine. Shiobi too. Shiobi also looked at her own body and was completely unharmed. By the way, although Shiobi was not afraid of the death ash storm, the elven skeletons could still cause surface abrasion to Shiobi. Hence, Wuming had also set up a tactic for her. Let's go back to the village first. Rick needs to rest well. Wuming looked again at Rick, who was dizzy from the high-speed movement. You bastard! You think it's caused by me? Rick roared angrily. It's Shiobi. Wuming pointed at Shiobi shamelessly. It's Shiobi. Shiobi nodded. In principle, Shiobi did indeed cause Rick to feel dizzy. I really lose to you guys. Chapter 429. Because Shiobi knew that they had to come directly to the cave that led to the village, Rick led the half-dead horse and led Wuming and Shiobi into the cave. Along the way, Rick kept reminding Wuming and Shiobi, remember, don't say anything unnecessary and make everyone suspicious. Also, Vero, You have to keep an eye on Shiobi and don't let her go berserk. Also, if people greet you, you have to answer them politely. Rick, I seriously suspect that you think I'm an ignorant god. Wu-ming complained helplessly. Cough cough, I'm just worried. Ha. Rick laughed awkwardly. You're indeed not an ignorant god. You're a problematic god. Immediately after, Rick stopped. Wu-ming and Shiobi, who were following behind Rick, also stopped. There was an old door in front of them. The large underground cave behind the door was Rick's village. Wu-ming had already noticed that when he was observing. Then let's go Villo Shiobi. With that said, Rick pushed open the old wooden door. Creak. Following the sound of the old wooden door, the cave appeared in front of Wu-ming and Shiobi. Rick? It was still the voice that Wu-ming heard before. The woman named Crone, Rick's sister, threw herself into Rick's arms. She hugged Rick tightly and called out Rick's name worriedly. I'm fine. Rick comforted his sister in a fluster. Because he went out alone and there was no one else to look after him, she was even more worried. Wu-ming saw that Crone was unusually worried this time. She was even more worried than last time. The others only looked at Rick and Shiobi from their posts. However, they were more curious about Wu-ming and Shiobi. I told you to call me sister. Who are the two behind you? At this time, Crone noticed the two people behind Rick. I met the wanderers on my way back. Their village was destroyed, so I brought them back. Following Rick's words, Wu-ming took off his brown hood and smiled at Crone. Hello, my name is Villo Salansword. This is my sister, Shiobi Salansword. Nice to meet you. By the way, because the neat black cloak looked too flashy, Wu-ming purposely changed his and Shiobi's cloaks to a refugee cloak. Brother and sister? That's great, Crone said enviously when she saw how dependent Shiobi was on her brother. Then, Shiobi opened her mouth. Please advise me. While she was at it, Shiobi pulled down her hood that appeared extremely large due to her figure and hid behind Wu-ming. Then she was adorable to Crone. What's wrong with this child? She's too cute. Crone hugged Shiobi and rubbed against her. This caused Rick to be shocked. Wu-ming cast a camouflage spell that could only change Shiobi's appearance in human eyes. In other words, her body did not change. But fortunately, Shiobi's body was based on human standards. In addition, Shiobi was instructed by Wu-ming to put away the mechanical objects, such as wings and the rings on her head. Therefore, there was no need to worry about being discovered. Shiobi could not understand Crone's actions. Seeing that Wu-ming did not give any instructions, she just let Crone hug her. As for Crone, she treated Shiobi as a shy child and didn't pay much attention to him. Crone, it's about time to prepare a room for Villo and the others, Rick said nervously. He was afraid that the Kikai seed would treat Crone's actions as an enemy's attack and counterattack. To put it bluntly, Rick was still worried about Shiobi's Kikai seed. He allowed Shiobi to join because of Wu-ming. Otherwise, why would Rick allow a Kikai seed to join his village for a mere game? However, Rick had forgotten one thing. If it wasn't for Silent Sound, Shiobi might have threatened Rick. Then, if Rick didn't agree, she would have played a game with him to determine the winner. The outcome wouldn't have changed. You're right. It's almost night. If we don't hurry, Villo and Shiobi won't have a place to sleep. Then, Crone quickly let go of Shiobi and prepared to help Wu-ming and Shiobi tidy up the room. Crone, I have a storage room next door. There's a bed too. Tidy it up a little and you can let them use it, Rick suddenly said. Can we? If that's the case, where do we put the collected information? Crone asked. It seems that storage room isn't an ordinary storage room. It should store the information that Rick has been collecting. Wu-ming thought. Put the information in my room. I need to study it today. As if he thought of something, Rick revealed a smile full of fighting spirit. Rick. Crone was stunned when she saw Rick smile. She hadn't seen Rick smile in a long time. What's wrong? Seeing Crone stunned, Rick stopped smiling and looked at Crone in confusion. Then Crone walked up to Rick step by step. She reached out her hands and touched Rick's face. She squeezed hard. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Rick was shocked by Crone's sudden attack. His own sister's attack on his face was not a normal kind of pain. Speak. Are you someone pretending to be Rick? Give me back my brother. Crone stared at Rick mockingly. How could Rick not know that this was his sister's sudden prank? I admit defeat, sister. Rick put his hands together and begged for mercy. Humph, humph, humph. Not enough. As she spoke, Crone increased her strength. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Willow. Wu Ming, on the other hand, had his arms crossed in front of his chest as he watched the farce between the siblings with great interest. A few minutes later, in Rick's room. The originally tidy room was now filled with all kinds of scrolls of information, filling the room to the brim. This was the stuff that Crone moved from next door. She was still cleaning the room next door. Rick rubbed his cheeks as he studied the map in front of him in annoyance. Your sister is quite interesting. Wu Ming, who was sitting on the bed, said with a smile. Well, she hasn't been this happy in a long time. This pain is worth it. Rick now understood that Crone had become like that after seeing his smile. Although Crone usually looked cheerful, she was always worried about her family, her brother Rick. The reason why Rick let Crone go was because he blamed himself for showing his bad attitude to his family. If only my sister could always be like this. Rick smiled. That depends on you, Rick. As long as you're happy, your sister will be happy too. Wu Ming, who was on the bed, said with boredom. Xiaobi, on the other hand, sat beside Wu Ming obediently and didn't do anything else. Well, that's true. Then, let's talk business, Lord God, Rick said seriously. Chapter 430. The first step in Wu Ming and Rick's plan was to prevent the humans from becoming the final battlefield. I already know about the secret weapons of the goblins and forest elves. However, that alone isn't enough to gather them together. As he spoke, Rick placed the map on the ground and showed it to Wu Ming. The Skywings are on the continent opposite Lucia, Yar-Ala. If we want them to leave Lucia, we'll need a plan, Rick said. The other races are either retreating from the battle or are too few in number. Furthermore, they're unable to fight against the other powerful races and want to reap the benefits. The only races with power are the Skywings, Forest Elves, and Goblins. Wu Ming marked the territories of the three races on the map. To put it simply, as long as the Forest Elves and Goblins are in conflict, they'll rope in some of the other races and form two camps, Rick said with a smile. This was a long-term understanding of the big picture. It was basically impossible to be wrong. Then, what we need to do now is to get the people of the various races on Lucia to leave. That'll require us to gather information. Then, Wu Ming and Rick looked at each other and smiled. Then, regarding the issue of manpower, I'll go select people to form a suicide squad later. After all, those races were scattered all over Lucia. If Rick were to rely on himself, it would take a very long time. Assuming that Rick found out about the Goblin's trump card and revealed the information about the Forest Goblin's Zeroth protection of the Void, then started to walk towards the Forest Goblin's territory. When he arrived at the Forest Goblin's territory, Rick would find that the two sides had already started fighting. The Goblins, who were wary of the Forest Goblins, had won the battle and killed the Forest Goblins without leaving anything behind. That would completely mess up the plan. Hence, they needed manpower and messenger pigeons. Even so, Rick, you haven't forgotten about me, have you? I'm super strong. Wu Ming looked at Rick. Rick understood what Wu Ming meant. As long as Wu Ming displayed his destructive power, it would be easy for the other races to retreat. After all, no one wanted to live in an area with a bomb nearby. But, isn't this the time to prove the possibility of humanity? Just wait and see. When I need you, I won't hold back. Rick smiled wantonly as he looked at Wu Ming. Then I'll wait and see. Wu Ming did not insist. He was here to save the humans, but he was not their nanny. It would be best if the humans could save themselves. If not, Wu Ming would step in. At this moment, someone knocked on the door. Please come in, Rick said. Rick had told him that he had something to discuss with the Villo, so he told him to knock on the door first if he wanted to find him. Creak. The door was pushed open, and Rick's sister, Crone, walked in. Villo Shiobi, the room is ready. You can use it later, Crone said gently. Yes, sorry to trouble you, Miss Crone. Wu-ming smiled at Crone. Thank you. Shiobi had been told by Wu-ming that she had to say thank you in this situation. Well, I can't, this child is too cute. Crone rushed up and hugged Shiobi, rubbing against her. But Shiobi made a silent protest. Looks like Miss Crone likes my sister a lot. Then, can I trouble you to take her for a bath? Wu-ming smiled and suggested. This time, not only Crone, but even Rick was surprised. Can I? I'll take good care of this child. Crone was surprised because she was happy to be able to bathe such a cute child. Then I'll have to trouble you. By the way, this child is very shy. If possible, can you bathe Shiobi alone? Wu-ming smiled and nodded. No problem, no problem. I'll take good care of Shiobi. I promise to bathe Shiobi until she's white and clean. Crone rubbed against Shiobi again. Be good and listen to your sister, Shiobi. Wu-ming stared at Shiobi and said, Shiobi, got it. Then Crone led Shiobi and left. Wait a minute, Villo. If we let Crone bathe Shiobi, won't we be exposed? Rick said in a panic. After all, even if he used a camouflage spell to change Shiobi's image in the eyes of others, once they were honest with each other, Crone who touched Shiobi would realize that something was wrong. Just like Shiobi's hair. Although it looked soft, it was actually made of ultra-tough metal wire. When she washed her hair, she would realize that something was wrong. Don't worry, Rick. I've already used suggestion magic on Crone. No matter how much I touch her, Crone will treat Shiobi as a human, Wu-ming said as he raised his hand and a ray of light appeared. This way, Shiobi will be able to better integrate into human life. What was that saying again? Being honest with each other was often a good way to increase trust. Just like the Japanese mixed bath. Cough cough. Back to the topic. Really, magic is so useful. Rick said enviously with his dead fish eyes. Let's continue. Then, Wu-ming and Rick sat opposite each other and continued their conversation. After a moment of conversation, Wu-ming understood Rick's meaning. Because we've considered that the other party will directly kill the informant, so we need to prepare more people? Wu-ming said. This was also why Rick needed a suicide squad. If there were too few people, the plan might fail. Yes, so I will gather some trustworthy people who can be part of the suicide squad and tell them about this, Rick said in a sorrowful tone. Therefore, these people were basically dead once they died. Rick's plan was for these people, including Rick himself, not to return to the village. They would be treated as dead ghosts who went out to explore. In addition, because the skeleton of the elves had the effect of shielding their aura, they needed to cover their bodies with some skeleton of the elves when they faced people of different races during missions. This was what humans called black ash. However, the skeleton of the elves had strong corrosive properties. Covering it with acid was equivalent to covering one's body with it. After a long time, one would directly die. This was the true meaning of Suicide Squad and ghosts. They were not afraid of death and dared to act as ghosts and become real ghosts. Clank, a bottle of potion was placed on the table by Wu-ming and made a sound. This is... Rick looked at the blue bottle of potion in confusion. This is a potion that can be used to contact abnormal states. If it's the corrosion of the skeleton of the elves, it might be effective. Try it later, Wu-ming said. This bottle of potion was an item in the Yggdrasil game, specifically used to deal with abnormal conditions. Wu-ming thought that corrosion was also an abnormal state, so he took it out and asked Rick to try it. You've been a great help, Villo. Rick looked at Wu-ming excitedly, and then carefully picked up the bottle of blue potion. Wu-ming smiled when he saw how careful Rick was. Clank, clank. The table was full of these potions. Clank, clank. Rick was dumbfounded. You can have as many as you want. Don't be shy. Wu-ming smiled and pointed at the table. Wu-ming took all of the potions that Nizalik had. Since Nizalik could make more, Wu-ming took all of them. Damn it. You bastards! Then, Rick's miserable cries could be heard. Chapter 431. Riker and Wu-ming went out to experiment. Riker smeared the black ash that could be seen everywhere on his hand, and then dripped a few drops of blue potion on the back of his hand. Instantly, the black ash disappeared, and the corrosive effect also disappeared. In the room, Wuming and Riker sat opposite each other. Shiobi sat beside Wuming in boredom. She had already been cleaned up by Crone and changed into her pajamas. "Damn it, evil gods, go to hell," Riker muttered. Hey, that's about enough. You can't even handle such a small blow?" Wuming smiled helplessly. The reason why Riker was like this was simply because Wuming's nouveau riche way of doing things provoked Riker. After all, in this war-torn era, everything was precious, and people cherished it very much. Based on the effect just now, if everyone covered their whole body with black ash and drank a bottle of blue potion, the black ash would last for 3 hours. After that, the black ash would be eliminated by the power of the potion. After all, the effects of taking it inside the body and taking it outside the body were completely different. Riker was also thinking of the worst-case scenario. Therefore, if a person covered their whole body with black ash and drank a bottle of potion, the black ash would last for 3 hours before disappearing. "Then use this amount as the standard and see the situation," Wuming said. After all, there was no need to cover the whole body with black ash. Not to mention the corrosive effect of the black ash. Even if the potion was effective, pain and scars would still be left. Moreover, for humans, the black ash only needed to cover a quarter of the body to completely conceal the aura, so that other races wouldn't be able to determine who the intruder was. For example, covering an arm to the chest, abdomen, and neck with black ash could almost completely conceal the aura of a human. "Well, I will choose the members of the Ghost tonight." Riker didn't dwell on the issue of Wuming's nouveau riche and became serious. "Speaking of which, Riker, leave the forest essence to me." Wuming looked at Riker seriously. "You don't believe me?" Although he said so, Rick still understood Wuming's intention. The forest elves were actually an exceptionally cunning, or rather, suspicious and vengeful race. Even though the goblins had developed magic airships and the orcs had mastered advanced navigation technology, the forest goblins had also developed magic airships that could cover an entire forest. Although its performance was not as good as the goblins. But in reality, these races were not as easy to deal with as the forest fairies. To put it simply, the forest elves were not as easy to fool as the other races. Compared to Rick and the others, Wuming could at least escape unscathed. "At least it's safer this way. I don't want you to come back half dead or unable to come back." Wuming jokingly teased Rick. "Then, are you confident?" Rick first smiled, then looked at Wuming seriously. "Of course," Wuming said without hesitation, with a confident expression on his face. "But I'll have to ask your ghost unit to cooperate with me a little." "No problem." Shiobi didn't speak at the side. She just looked at the conversation between the two as if they were old friends who had been together for many years. Data flowed in her orange-yellow eyes. "This is also a heart." Just like that, a great plan that could subvert all races was unveiled once again. The next morning, Wuming came out of his room early. Wuming didn't go to see the recruitment of the ghost last night. He just took a quick look and left with Shiobi. Coincidentally, because Wuming and Rick's rooms were next to each other, Wuming met Rick, who was about to leave his room as soon as he went out. "Yo Rick, you're up early." Wuming greeted. "You actually have the nerve to greet me. I originally wanted you and Zio to support me, but you actually sneaked away." Rick had a tragic expression. "You don't know how nervous I was at that time. Everyone was looking at me. So many people only looked at me when I became the village chief." "You don't know." Wuming didn't listen to Rick's complaints. Instead, he looked at Shiobi, who was holding his hand. By the way, this was suggested by Shiobi. Shiobi used the reason of "shouldn't siblings hold hands?" to let Wuming hold her hand. "Is she afraid of crowds?" Wuming said with interest. "Shiobi doesn't know." Shiobi calmly shook her head. "Right, Shiobi, how was your interaction with Crone yesterday?" After all, Shiobi and Crone were honest with each other. They must have gotten along well. On the other hand, Shiobi seemed to have recalled something terrible. Wuming could clearly sense that Shiobi's body trembled slightly. "Crone is so scary." Shiobi recalled how Crone hugged and played with Shiobi in the shower yesterday. She felt a lingering fear. Seeing Shiobi like this, Wuming could only smile awkwardly and didn't say anything else. Hey, don't ignore me. Suddenly, Rick raised his voice. Oh, are you done, Rick? Wuming responded with a smile. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. Rick shook his head. The ghost is ready. We only need an opportunity to act. After all, many people leaving the village was a matter of concern. Hence, they couldn't just let those who were willing to become ghosts leave the village. Wuming brought 2 pieces of news to Rick. Good news and bad news. Which one do you want to hear first? Bad news, Rick answered without hesitation. I noticed a gnome warship nearby, as well as a few dragon gnomes. Perhaps because the 2 races had a conflict before, the gnomes and dragon gnomes didn't like each other. What Wu Ming meant was that this time, the 2 would most likely affect the surrounding human villages, which were Rick's small villages. Hearing this, Rick frowned at first. Then his brows relaxed. Through this bad news, Rick also guessed the good news. That's right. It's just as you thought. After this attack, the ghosts can act. Wuming smiled. Wuming woke up early in the morning to tell Rick these 2 pieces of news. At this moment, the mountain where the village was located shook violently. Without a doubt, the gnomes and dragon gnomes nearby were fighting. You really have a crow's mouth. Rick didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Wuming. He didn't know whether to praise or scold him. Chapter 432. Everyone, leave from the west exit. Crone shouted, directing the panicking crowd to leave. Although Wu Ming and Rick didn't wake up late, Crony and a portion of the villagers woke up even earlier than them. These villagers were mostly young men and women. The rest of the villagers were old, weak, sick, disabled, and children. The rest of the villagers were woken up by the tremors outside. Following the shouts of their loved ones, they hurriedly packed their luggage and left in the designated direction. This was because the humans in this world would be affected by the battles of other races after a period of time. Therefore, the humans had to prepare their luggage early in order to prepare for any unexpected situations. In this era, death was a common occurrence. It was even possible to lose one's life while sleeping. Therefore, the people were used to preparing their luggage early. Like people who were used to earthquakes, they didn't panic and left in an orderly manner. However, it could be seen that the humans in this world lived in a cruel world. Seeing that almost everyone was leaving, Crone noticed that Rick and the Villo siblings didn't leave. Did something happen? Crone said worriedly. According to Rick, the Villo and Shiobi were clear-headed, so he wanted to discuss some issues with them. Crone believed Rick's words. After all, if the Villo siblings weren't smart, they wouldn't be able to wander around in this chaotic world. Because idiots had already died in the hands of natural disasters, black and gray, and other races. Even if it was because they had overslept the previous night, it was impossible for Rick, Varen, and the others to not be affected by such a violent tremor. Therefore, the only answer was that something else had happened. Crone ran to Rick's room. Looking at the half-closed door, Crone trembled as she pushed the door open. Rick's body trembled as he knelt on the ground in grief and let out a sorrowful cry. Damn it! How many more times do I have to go through this, Rick? Crone looked at her grief-stricken brother and couldn't bear to see him like this. Crone hugged Rick from behind and comforted him. That's enough, Rick. Leave the rest to me. Then, the corners of Rick's mouth curved into a smile. Have you memorized it, Villo? After Rick finished speaking, Wuming and Zio appeared at the door. At the same time, Wuming was holding a pen and paper in his hand. Not a single word missing. Wuming raised the paper in his hand at the same time. That's it, Crone. You're the next village chief. This is the map of the next village. The safest path is along the edge. Rick stood up and handed a map to Crone. Huh. Crone didn't even realize what had happened. That's it, Chloe. With that, Rick walked to the door and met up with Wuming. Wait a minute, what the hell is going on? Rick, where are you going? Crone was extremely confused. Even though Crony's talent was enough for her to become the village chief, she still couldn't accept Rick's sudden departure. Just ending this game. Don't worry. Rick turned around and smiled wantonly. Don't worry. I still have a sister to take care of. I won't mess around with Rick. Wu-Ming raised his hand and suggested. This made Crone sigh in relief. She couldn't accept the sudden departure of a new friend. Then I'll leave Zio to you. Wu-Ming pushed Zio into Crone's arms. Huh. Although Crone liked this cute child, she couldn't bear to see them messing around like this. And just as Crony was about to say something, Shiobi spoke. Big sister? Crone. Shiobi stuttered shyly as she looked at Crone with her big watery eyes. Instantly, the suggestion magic that Wu-Ming cast on Zio was activated. With Zio's cute performance, Crone, who was a normal person, seemed to have been charmed. Wah, leave it to me. Instantly, Crone shrieked as she hugged Zio and rubbed against her. I'm just sending Rick off. I'll be back soon. After Wu-Ming finished speaking, Rick and Wu-Ming left. After Wu-Ming and Rick left, Crone reacted. You must return safely. She prayed to the running man. Outside, on the path of retreat. Due to the fight between the goblins and the dragon goblins, not only did the ordinary people have to return to the village, even Rick and the specters had to return to the specter's nest. Now, Wu-Ming and Rick were walking on the path to the specter's nest. I wanted to ask, are you going back to the village? Rick looked at Wu-Ming suspiciously. Therefore, according to the plan, Wu-Ming had almost no time to leave Rick and the others and return to the village. I have my ability. I can create a clone of the same level as me. Wu-Ming explained. Wu-Ming's dependent avatar had the ability to split his avatar. Wu-Ming was going to use that ability to send his avatar back to the village to take care of Shiobi. After all, Shiobi was just living with human beings. Not to mention whether Shiobi's avatar would be discovered by human beings. Moreover, Shiobi needed someone to enlighten her. It just so happens that I also have a question. Wu-Ming said. Do you want me to record what you said just now? Isn't that something that can be forged in minutes? Only the heavens knew why there was a need for someone to record the words with a pen and paper as proof. Wu-Ming wasn't wrong at all. That thing could be forged directly. It's just a title to replace the village chief. It's not that useful. Rick smiled slightly. You really have a bad taste. Wu-Ming joked. Goddess Sama is not qualified to say that. Rick retorted. Both of them laughed. When they came to the entrance of a cave, both Wu-Ming and Rick stopped. Then I'll go first. Wu-Ming looked away. Well, we will also launch a strategy against the goblins and the orcs in 5 days. Immediately, without saying much, Rick and Wu-Ming walked into the cave with their backs facing each other. Rick walked directly into the cave, and Wu-Ming flew directly into the sky and flew away. So, they were really going to leave after sending him off. Chapter 433. After Wu-Ming left the human gathering place, he directly returned to his true form and flew into the sky. Then, because of the plan, Wu-Ming directly cancelled the various shielding techniques on his body. At the same time, Wu-Ming also released his own energy, which was the holy aura. At that moment, Wu-Ming was like a flame in the night, a fireball, which was extremely eye-catching. Now, the goblins' air fleet is on the northern coast of Lucia. Wu-Ming remembered the map that Rick showed him. Wu-Ming stayed in the air and looked to the north. Wu-Ming's current location was south of Lucia, which was not far from the northern coast. Let's mess around a little. With that said, Wu-Ming spread his wings and quickly flew toward the north. In the south, Lucia and Yar-Ala intersected. It was an ocean, and the forest elves' fleet was sailing from that ocean. As the current chief octopal sorcerer of the forest elves and the main researcher of the Zeroth Ward of the Void, Shinki Nirbalian's wisdom was naturally needless to say. She was also quite proud of herself, so she took on the heavy responsibility of the forest elves' fleet commander. However, she was rather fearful of the mysterious powerful being that the dragon spirit mentioned. After all, even though it was annoying to think of a musclehead who didn't have any intelligence and relied solely on brute strength, Schick had to admit that his powerful strength was indeed frightening. As a result, it was no longer appropriate for her to act freely in Lucia. Shinky once suspected the identity of the mysterious powerhouse, but she could not tell which race he was from until the creator of the Sky Forest Elves, Canas, arrived. Her creator, the god Canas, had told her that the mysterious expert was not from another race, but a god from another world. However, the star cup of that planet did not work on him, so she did not have to worry about him competing for the star cup. Coincidentally, she received news recently that the forest elves' old rival, the goblins, was attacked. According to the spy's report, the goblins could not capture the other party's figure, and the fleet's instruments could only detect a large number of powerful energy sources. Those energy sources were not elves, but unknown energy sources. From this, Shinky judged that the dragon who attacked the goblins' fleet was the powerhouse from another world that Canas mentioned. Therefore, Shinky decided to evacuate the forest elves from Lucia. However, it seemed that the goblins' losses were not serious. Because of that, it just proved that the mysterious powerhouse was just passing by, and the reason for the attack was unknown. In any case, the forest elves enjoyed watching the forest elves. Shinky made such a decision in order not to let her people follow in their footsteps. So, as the forest elves fleet, the elves' airship fleet, the elves' airship fleet, and headed to the Yar Ayla continent. Naturally, Shinky had his own plans for heading towards the continent of Yar Ayla. Gods, the Zeroth elves, the Zeroth god, was the elves, was the god. Standing at the front of the fleet, Shinky looked at the Lucia continent. For the sake of our god, please bless us, Canas. Shinky prayed to his god. And at that moment, not good. Lord Shinky. An ordinary forest elves soldier hurriedly ran to the bow of the ship. What's the matter? Don't panic. Shinky looked at the soldier unhappily. I'm sorry, Lord Shinky. The soldier calmed down and stood up straight. Tell me what happened. Shinky asked casually. It's like this, Lord Shinky. Our magic has detected an unknown energy source, and the amount is huge. The captain asked me to inform you. What did you say? In the captain's room of the Forest Elves' magic airship flagship. Shinky walked in a little panic, and his eyes suddenly rushed to the big screen. What the hell is going on? Shinky said with a little anger. At that moment, because of the confidentiality issue, there was only one captain left in the entire captain's room, and that captain didn't know why Shinky was angry, so the captain had to report truthfully. It's like this, Lord Shinky, we just detected a large non-elven energy source. I'm worried that it's that, so I asked the soldier to inform you. The captain said politely. Even he had to show respect to the Zeroth Shield's chiefs, 8 stages, and the Zeroth Elves. That was why Shinky roared angrily as soon as he came in. Shinky naturally understood what the other party meant by that. As the captain, Shinky naturally knew that the goblins were attacked, and he also knew that the goblins were also attacked after detecting a large non-elven energy source. The soldier didn't know the situation, so after being persuaded by Shinky, he reported very calmly. And Shinky naturally knew that the situation changed from the goblins' panic to the Red Crown Cranes and the Red Crown Cranes. That made Shinky feel like she was fooled, and that was why Shinky was so angry as soon as he entered the room. That didn't attack? Shinky frowned slightly and asked the captain. Because the goblins were attacked after detecting that energy source, Shinky was shocked that they weren't attacked. No, but the other party used a shielding spell. We can't use detection magic to see the other party's influence, we can only see with our eyes. The captain shook his head. The other party's identity is a mystery. Not only did it interfere with the battle between the dragon elves and Kikai elves, but it also attacked the goblins, and it's not one of us. The captain said in distress. Of course, the arrival of the god Canas would not let the captain know. Although his status was slightly higher, it was not that high. In order to maintain a sense of mystery, only 10 people knew about the arrival of Canas. Those 10 people were either powerful or strong, and Shinky, as the main developer of the Zeroth shield, naturally knew about it. You don't have to worry about the other party's identity, the higher-ups have their own arrangements. Where is the other party now? Shinky changed the topic. The captain quickly checked the energy source, and as a result, the captain was shocked, and his face changed. It's right here. What? Shinky was also surprised. The captain brought up the image, and the energy source just happened to coincide with the flagship. Yo, 2 forest elves. Chapter 434. Wu Ming's voice came from the captain's room. Who is it? The captain roared and looked towards the source of the voice. A young man with black hair and red pupils wearing a loose white shirt appeared out of thin air at the door of the captain's room and leaned against the wall of the captain's room. Oh, aren't you looking for me? Wu Ming smiled. Exenku frowned slightly and said to the captain without turning her head. You can leave first. But Lord Exenku... Okay, I understand. The captain wasn't stupid and walked towards Wu Ming's position. That was the door. Wu Ming wasn't afraid that the captain would go home and call for reinforcements, because both sides knew that violence wouldn't solve the problem. The captain's room door opened, and the captain took a deep look at Wu Ming before leaving. Bam, heech, the captain's room door closed again. Now, the only ones left in the captain's room were the Forest Elite's Chief Level 8 Sorcerer Exenku Nirba and Wu Ming. Then, Lord God, what can I do for you? Exenku politely bowed slightly and greeted Wu Ming. Don't be nervous, Wu Ming said calmly, then walked to the captain's room and sat down. I don't mean any harm. Wu Ming maintained a smile as if everything was within his control, and looked at Exenku with incomparable arrogance. You must be joking, Lord Canas has already told us about you. As a god from another world, you don't need to compete for the Star Cup, so please tell us your intentions. Exenku's words were still polite, but Wu Ming could hear the mockery in her words. You really dare to say that Caina's creation? Wu Ming was instantly angered. Although he still had a smile, the anger in his eyes and the aura he emitted made Exenku feel terrified. After all, Lord Canas is a supreme existence. We can't compare to you in terms of power or wisdom, so please forgive Exenku's offense. Exenku Nirba's meaning was clear. They were weak, so it was better to be straightforward with a powerful being like Canas, because they had to agree no matter what. Wu Ming naturally understood this, so he only got a little angry and calmed down. Then I'll be straightforward. Then I'll get straight to the point. I found something interesting in the air fleet of the goblins. It's an existence comparable to the Zeroth protection of the void. What? Exenku heard Wu Ming's words and couldn't stay calm. Not only was she surprised that Wu Ming knew about the Zeroth protection of the void, but she was also surprised that the goblins had an existence comparable to the Zeroth protection of the void. Don't worry, even if I know about the Zeroth protection of the void, I won't do anything to you. Besides, I'm here for your own good this time. Wu Ming smiled and calmed Exenku down. Her beautiful face was solemn. Then, Lord Canas, are you going to tell us about the gophers? Exenku asked. There was another layer of meaning in this sentence. Even if you are helping us forest elves, do you have a purpose or something else? After all, it was impossible to give without expecting anything in return. There was no such thing as a free lunch. As a wise person, Exenku Nirba naturally understood this principle. Don't be nervous. You also know that I can't use this planet's star cup even if I obtain it. I don't have any other purpose, I'm just doing this for my own pleasure. Wu Ming shrugged and waved his hand. Pleasure? Exenku furrowed her brows in confusion. After all, I can't obtain any benefits from this world. I can only enjoy the pleasure this world brings me, Wu Ming explained. The goblins have developed a weapon that can explode divine marrow. It's called Marrow Explosion. The Marrow Explosion is all loaded in their aerial fleet and can be launched at any time. Wu Ming's words made Exenku slightly excited. Explode divine marrow? Exenku fell into deep thought. If that was the case, it would indeed have the same deterrence as the Zeroth protection of the void. It was better to believe it than not. They had to be cautious. Let me give you another reminder. The goblins already know that you have the Zeroth protection of the void. Wu Ming's words gave Exenku another heavy blow. How is that possible? Xenku thought that her forest goblin's defense system and anti-spy system were perfect. Therefore, Xenku didn't think that anyone would be able to sneak in and discover their secret weapon. The Zeroth protection of the void was correct. Since you can send spies to the other side can naturally send spies as well. Don't be too complacent, forest goblins, Wu Ming warned. All in all, just be careful. I don't want this good show to be ruined. With that, Wu Ming stood up and prepared to leave. Thank you for the information, sir. Xenku bowed deeply to Wu Ming. However, her voluptuous chest swayed in front of Wu Ming's face. Cough cough. It's nothing. After all, I was very bored when I accidentally got lost in this world. How can I not find some entertainment for myself? I hope you won't disappoint me. With that, a black space appeared in front of Wu Ming. The space swallowed Wu Ming and the black door disappeared. It seemed that the other party relied on this thing to enter. Why didn't the comfortable version of shielding space teleportation work? Could it be that it wasn't space teleportation? Xenku began to think hard. However, this was none of Wu Ming's business. Phew! Wu Ming let out a long sigh. Seriously, I'm really not suited to play the bad guy. At this moment, Wu Ming leaned against a tree and rested. Suddenly, a golden light appeared on Wu Ming's arm and a clear voice said, Sir Wu Ming, you were lying to that young lady, right? Of course. I just went to the goblin's place to cover it up. You've been following me all this time. Other than the fact that the goblins have marrow explosion, everything else was a lie. Wu Ming smiled proudly. Including his easily angered and arrogant behavior, as well as the spy's information and his own goal, none of it could be said to be true. As for the fact that he couldn't use the Star Cup, Wu Ming hadn't even seen it before. Who knew if he could use it? In any case, Wu Ming had no intention of using the Star Cup. After all, the forest goblins have many wise people. Being able to create the Zeroth Ward of the Void and use a fake name, Xenku, is a wise person among wise people. If I don't tell her this, she probably won't believe me. Even if Wu Ming gave Xenku the impression that he was an easily angered, arrogant, rude, and vulgar god from another world, Xenku would still listen to him. After all, it was better to believe it than not. It would be troublesome if she failed miserably. I've done what I should. The rest will be left to Rick. What I should do now is to meet Artemisia. Chapter 435. In a secret cave somewhere, Rick and Wu Ming sat opposite each other. In front of them was a map that was larger than an ordinary one. On the map were chess pieces carved from crystals of different colors. These chess pieces represented the various races. Now, there were no more chess pieces representing the various races on the Lucia continent on the map. In other words, the major races had already withdrawn from the Lucia continent. There were basically no large races left on the continent where humans were. In that case, the first step is complete, Wu Ming said calmly. The goal of not letting the continent where humans were located become a battlefield had been achieved. The battlefield on the Yar-Ala continent has also been formed. Rick smiled as if everything was under his control. In the southeast of the Yar continent, there were chess pieces representing the forest elves, fairy elves, and dragon elves. The forest elves entered the southeast of the Yar continent through the southern part of the Lucia continent and pulled out the fairy elves, who had retired from their hidden nests, to join the forest elves alliance. With the idea that the enemy of their enemy was their friend, the forest elves pulled in the dragon elves, who were at odds with the goblins. However, there were very few dragon elves. The three forces were entrenched in the southeast of the Yar-Ala continent, led by the forest elves. In the northeast of the Yar-Ala continent, there were chess pieces representing the goblins, giants, and fantasy breeds. The goblins were originally entrenched in the northwest of the Lucia continent. Due to Wu Ming's attack and the orcs' discovery of their secret weapon, marrow explosion, the goblin fleet had no choice but to set sail to the northwest of the Yar-Ala continent. As the giants had always been on good terms with the goblins, the two quickly began to form an alliance. The fantasy breeds joined because the goblins exposed the forest elves' magic technique, the Zeroth Ward of the Void, to the fantasy breeds. The Zeroth Ward of the Void, which was based on controlling the self-destruction of fantasy breeds, was something that the fantasy breeds hated. Therefore, the fantasy breeds joined the goblins' alliance. However, fantasy breeds were rare to begin with, so the forest elves and goblins were currently evenly matched. In addition to these three forces, there was also the native force of the Yar-Ala continent, Artheus, and the Skywing species under his command. The Skywing species occupied the body of a huge fantasy breed called a Bantiheim. This fantasy breed was an apostle subdued by the god of war, Arthas. It had followed Arthas since ancient times, acting as a gathering place for the Skywing species under his command. This third force seemed to have very few people. It consisted of Arthas, Skywing breeds, and a fantasy breed. However, even without Arthas, the Skywing breeds were still extremely powerful existences. Aside from the Skywings, there were very few other life forms, such as fantasy breeds, dragon breeds, and giant breeds. These life forms basically did not have a fixed gathering place, and even if they moved together, there would not be more than a dozen of them. As for the Skywings, because they had a gathering place, they would basically move out in groups and hunt for heads. It could be said that no one was willing to provoke the Skywings. That was why the forest goblins and goblins were on Lucia and not Yar-Ala. However, war was a collective battle, so the Skywings might be slightly weaker. However, the Skywings still had a powerful ability that they could use as a group, Skystrike. The old capital of the forest goblins, Marilon, was destroyed by a Skywing Skystrike. If Arthas was included, then it would be impossible to calculate. In this world, the gods were born from the elven corridor, and the gods that were born had their own characteristics, concepts, and so on. The creations of the gods were often the same as the gods. For example, the creator of the goblins, god Okan, had the title of god of forging. The goblins were also experts in the field of forging. The magic airships were the first to be researched by the goblins. The magic airships of the forest goblins were actually just using magic to make the warships fly, unlike the goblins' magic airships that used fuel ores as a power source. Canas was the god of the forest, and her creations were the elves that were close to the forest. As the god of wisdom, she could use 168 types of spells at the same time, which was the so-called 168 types of spellcasters. It should be known that the strongest of the forest goblins was the 8th type of spellcasters. That was how wise Canas was. As for the Kikai race, their god initially wanted to find someone to answer his questions, so he created 5 small machines. However, he realized that these 5 small machines could not answer his questions. Therefore, the god passed through his own spirit and died. Then, those 5 small machines developed into the current Kikai race. The god of war was naturally born from hatred, hostility, malice, blood, and other things related to war. That was why Arthas was crowned as the strongest. Therefore, the power of war was often terrifying, more terrifying than wisdom, forging, and so on. Meanwhile, the forest elves had developed the Zeroth Void Blessing, while the goblins had developed the Marrow Explosion. Both of them were confident in themselves, which was why Silent and Rick had pushed them to the Iliala continent to face off against the Skywings. Now, this could be considered the final war. That was because the remaining races basically all withdrew from the final war for their own reasons. The Sea Dwellers were not interested in the continent and did not want to participate in the war, so they lived in the deep sea. The Moonsong race had always lived on the huge red moon, standing aloof from worldly affairs. The vampires lost in the war and could not participate in the war. As for the demons, those things were actually just demons and monsters, so why would they care about the war? By the way, the beastmen fled directly from the sea. They were originally not far from the goblins, so when Rick and the others leaked the information about the Marrow Explosion, they quickly gathered their entire race and retreated from the sea. As for the Kikai race, they did not provoke others, and others did not provoke them, so they lived in peace. Coincidentally, almost all of these races were races whose gods had died. It was precisely because their gods had died that they chose to preserve themselves. After all, the prize of the war was for the gods, and they might not necessarily use it even if it was given to them. The three forces are already in their own positions and are on guard against each other. Now, all we need is a catalyst, and the final war will begin. Then Rick looked at Wu Ming. Wu Ming was such a catalyst. Then there's no time to lose. Let's begin tonight, Wu Ming said with a nod. Then, Wu Ming directly entered his spatial door and left the cave. The future of humanity will be decided tonight. Chapter 436. The sun set and night fell. In the Yar-Ala continent, Wu Ming floated in the air as he looked at the massive creatures in the sky. Abendheim, the gnome fleet, and the forest elves' magic airship had all settled down peacefully, forming a tripartite balance of forces. Even so, Wu Ming was still only interested in Arthas. Wu Ming had learned from studying the forest elves' Zeroth Void Blessing that the technique had extremely high lethality, but it was fine if he couldn't hit it. As for the gnome's marrow explosion, Wu Ming estimated that it could match the Zeroth Void Blessing, but it was still the same. It was fine if he couldn't hit it. If it was just a defenseless Arthas, then the Zeroth Ward of the Void and Marrow Explosion might have been effective. However, against a group of Skywing species that could use Sky Strike, as well as Arthas behind the Skywing species, the forest goblins and goblins would have a hard time hitting their targets. However, Wu Ming didn't care if the forest elves and gnomes could kill the Godslayer, or if Arthas could defeat the 6 major races. These had nothing to do with Wu Ming. Wu Ming's goal had always been clear, and that was to help Rick and let the humans obtain victory with their own hands. That was all. In this way, the Kikai species that could replicate the techniques of other races would come in handy. After all, what better way to signal the start of a battle than when the enemy released their signature technique? However, Wu Ming only knew one Kikai species, and that was Zayubala's, or Shiobi. However, Wu Ming didn't want Shiobi to participate in the battle. As Wu Ming had an avatar, he was very clear about Shiobi's current state. The human villagers' care and enthusiasm for Shiobi made Shiobi, who had long developed a desire to explore her heart, surge like a lake that had been opened. At present, Shiobi often had situations where data kept flowing in her eyes, her head heated up, and her body trembled as she said, "Arthur." Fortunately, Wu Ming's clone was there. Through Wu Ming's Lune Runes and Yggdrasil, World Tree, magic, the villagers didn't notice that Shiobi wasn't human. Even Crony, who hugged Shiobi to sleep almost every night and often bathed with him, didn't notice that Shiobi wasn't human. In addition, Wu Ming would guide her from time to time. Wu Ming believed that Shiobi had already obtained imperfect feelings. The reason was in Wu Ming's hands. "Thank you, Shiobi." Wu Ming took out a metal sphere and thanked Shiobi, who was far away on Lucia. The metal sphere in Wu Ming's hand was given to him by Zio. "Nameless, needs this? I'll give it to you." Although Shiobi had feelings for him, she still had that submissive personality, although she liked it this way. "After all, we're siblings, aren't we?" Then, Shiobi handed the metal sphere to Wu Ming's clone. At that time, Wu Ming's clone looked at Shiobi with an indescribable gaze, but Shiobi only smiled. The clone believed that it was the most beautiful smile Wu Ming had ever seen in this world. Although it was a clone, the clone was still Wu Ming. Therefore, other than knowing that he was a clone, he was basically the real Wu Ming. Therefore, Wu Ming's clone accepted Shiobi's gift and patted her head. "Thank you, Shiobi." In order to let Shiobi stay here with peace of mind, Wu Ming's clone accepted the metal sphere and immediately used a teleportation door to transfer the metal sphere to Wu Ming's hand. He also explained to Shiobi the truth that he was a clone. Shiobi didn't feel depressed. Even if you're a clone, your love for Shiobi isn't any less than your main body. This made Wu Ming's doppelganger extremely touched. We can't disappoint the young lady's kind intentions. At this moment, Wu Ming said as he injected magic into the metal ball. Although it wasn't, Wu Ming's special ability allowed devil power to use these devices that relied on power. In an instant, the metal sphere turned into a simple armor and stuck tightly to Wu Ming's body. This feeling, is it the Jikai type? Wu Ming extended his hand and moved his arm that was already covered in metal. When the clone gave Wu Ming the metal sphere, he didn't tell Wu Ming how to use it. He simply told him to inject devil power into it. He didn't expect it to be an external armor of the Jikai type. However, it didn't seem to be just that. With his mind, a lens appeared in Wu Ming's left eye. Through the lens, Wu Ming could see things like analysis. However, because Wu Ming wasn't a Jikai type, he couldn't understand the data. I see. Is part of the Jikai type's ability in this armor? Wu Ming understood the function of this thing. The metal sphere from before could be said to be a byproduct of Shiobi's split. It could also be said to be an inferior version of the Jikai type. Wu Ming was no longer surprised by the Jikai type that evolved from just 5 small square boxes. The Jikai type was a bug. Because Wu Ming didn't have the Jikai type's calculation ability, he couldn't inherit all of this power. However, it was still possible to use a weapon. Wu Ming raised his 2 arms that were covered in thin metal and aimed at the gnomes and forest spirits. Let me try. Something that contains Shiobi's feelings. Pseudo Sky Strike. After Wu Ming finished speaking, the magic power in his body burned fiercely like fuel. Wu Ming's entire body shone like a bright star in the night. Then, 2 long sniper rifle barrels extended from Wu Ming's palms. Simulating the Sky Strike of the Skywing type, the 2 forces instantly condensed, and then, boom! 2 huge cannonball-like sounds resounded through the sky. 2 meteors flew straight toward the forest spirits' magic airships and the gnomes' magic fleet. Boom! There were violent roars on both sides, and flames shone in the night. From the flames, Wu Ming could vaguely see that a few of the gnomes' ships had fallen. On the other hand, the magic airship of the forest fairies was fine. It made sense. The forest spirits' airships were definitely filled with defensive spells. Even if the gnomes' fleet had defensive spells, they wouldn't be able to use them as well as the forest spirits. After all, Wu Ming's previous attack had expended a lot of magic power, but it had only brought down a few of the gnomes' magic airships. Is it because of the imitation? Wu Ming looked at the gun barrel that was still smoking due to the overload. However, he had achieved his goal, which was to start this war that wouldn't start for a long time. Wu Ming looked at the gigantic whale-like fantasy breed, Abendheim. After removing the armor on his body and placing the metal ball into the golden ripples, Wu Ming created another clone, and his main body flew toward Abendheim. The clone that had 50% of Wu Ming's main body remained where it was. The only difference was that the left arm of the clone was covered in a black glove. Plan B had begun. Chapter 437. On the fantasy breed Abendheim, the green-haired Skywing breed's first creation, Azrael, sat on the edge of a rock, casually looking at the joint fleet of the forest elves and gnomes. Truly a bunch of people who don't know their limits, meow, Azrael said with a peculiar tone, her 2 eyes revealing death. This was a characteristic of the Skywing breeds. Looking directly into their eyes would mean seeing death. How boring! Why aren't they attacking yet? I can't wait to collect their heads. The final creation, Giliel, flew beside Azrael in boredom, her pink hair wantonly fluttering. Although she looked like a loser, the death in Giliel's eyes was no less than Azrael's. Well, after all, the other party is coming with such ferocity. It's best to be cautious, meow. Although that was what she said, Azrael's face was brimming with a frivolous smile. She did not believe that these people could defeat their creator, war god Artesius, even if they worked together. Besides, they had not yet worked together and had instead chosen to split into 2 to form a tripartite confrontation. How sad. If they worked together, they might have had a chance, meow, Azrael said mockingly. Don't say that, Azrael. In any case, they'll definitely be defeated by Lord Artesius. It doesn't matter if they work together or not. Giliel flew behind Azrael, waving her hands as she calmly said. It seemed that the Skywings were truly confident in their creator, Artesius. After hearing Giliel's voice, Azrael lowered her head as if she had heard something terrifying. Azrael, are you still thinking of using the same trick? Giliel seemed to already know the outcome and quickly distanced herself from Azrael, who had lowered her head. Suddenly, Azrael flew up and ran toward Giliel. Wah, little Giliel, call me big sister, meow. No way, Giliel said evasively, and Azriel chased after her. Then let me hug you for a bit please, meow, he-heats then try to catch up to me. Then, the two beautiful bird-like girls began to chase each other in the air. If one were to take a closer look, other than the length of their hair, the color of their hair, and their faces, the two of them were quite similar in terms of clothing style and body proportions. If one were to say that the two of them were fraternal twins, people would believe it. In truth, all the skywing species looked similar. After all, they were all made from the feather fragments of the god of war, Arthas. It could be said that all the skywing species were sisters. As for the wings, they were a necessity for the skywing species. At this moment, Azriel and Jillian came to a halt and gazed into the distance. That wasn't where the forest goblins or goblins' fleets were located. Instead, it was an empty space. However, if one looked carefully, they would be able to see where the light came from. One had to know that even a little light in the dark would attract attention, not to mention, that's right. That was Sky Strike, Giliel said calmly. The Skywings were the most familiar with the abilities of the Skywings, but this Sky Strike seemed especially powerful. Sure enough, at this moment, that light suddenly split into two and flew toward the forest goblins and goblins. Boom! Almost instantly, the Sky Strike struck the forest goblins and goblins' fleets, creating a huge explosion. I've already given the order for the Skywings to obediently stay here, meow. Azriel frowned. Those two Sky Strikes were already the most powerful attacks a single Skywing could unleash. This was also why the lively and active Jillian had not gone out. Well, who knows? Maybe some of the sisters are a little willful, Jillian said jokingly with a smile. The flames of the explosion soared into the sky like a beautiful flower in the dark night, igniting the flames of war. Time to go, little Jillian. Get ready to attack, meow, Azriel said. Whether it was the Skywing sisters or someone pretending to be them, the forest goblins and goblins would not turn a blind eye to the provocation of the Skywings just because of a misunderstanding. Is the battle finally about to begin? Jillian smiled happily, the death in her eyes becoming even more apparent. On the other side, on the forest goblins' fleet. Lady Shinka, we've been attacked by the Skywing Skystrike. What do we do? Should we counterattack? The captain asked, somewhat flustered. Have the dragon goblins wait for now. Rule the fairy goblins and prepare to activate the Zeroth Void Blessing with us, Shinka said calmly as she looked at the captain. Yes, sir. The captain saluted and left. After the captain left, Shinka wiped the sweat off her forehead. What's with that Sky Strike? My defensive technique almost failed to block it. Indeed, that Sky Strike had been blocked by Shinka's defensive technique. If the forest goblins' warships had taken it head-on, there was a 100% chance that several of their warships would have been destroyed. Isn't the goblins a good example? Shinka thought to herself as she looked at the downed warships of the goblins. But the Skywings shouldn't be that stupid. After all, the situation was not favorable at all. Starting a war at this time was the most unwise choice. Or maybe someone is framing us. Shinka frowned and stroked her chin. However, even if someone was framing them or the Skywings were deliberately starting a war, they were still in a passive position. The fireworks, just now was like a signal. Not only the Skywings, but the goblins had also begun to take action. After all, the goblins had already lost a few magic airships. How could they not take revenge? Furthermore, the goblins probably did not realize that someone was framing the Skywings. However, there was no need for that. They just needed to win. My Zeroth Void Blessing is invincible. Skywings, goblins, and war god Artemisu, just wait for your destruction, Shinka said confidently. However, they would soon be slapped in the face. On the other side, the goblin fleet. Sure enough, the goblins' fleet had already begun to reload their marrow bombs after losing a few of their magic airships. Meanwhile, the goblins had temporarily pacified the fantasy breeds and giant breeds. The arrogant goblin leader was prepared to use his secret weapon to destroy the Zeroth Void Blessing of the forest goblins and the Sky Strike of the Skywings. There was no doubt that he was an arrogant fellow. the Skywings gathered together and activated Skystrike. Because Lord Artemisu did not appear for some reason, all the Skywings began to listen to Azrael's orders and prepared to use Skystrike to simulate Artemisu's divine strike to deal with the forest goblins and goblins. On the other side, at the forefront of the forest goblin fleet, Shinka stood at the bow of the fleet and nodded at the Zeroth void blessing prepared by the forest goblins behind her. On the other side, the goblin leader also nodded when he saw that the marrow bombs had already been reloaded. At the same time, the three sides seemed to have come to an agreement and unleashed their strongest attacks. Pseudo Sky Strike. Zeroth Void Blessing. Release. Marrow Bomb Fire. A white holy light with golden edges, an energy pillar filled with green energy, and several missiles comparable to hydrogen bombs and atomic bombs were used at the same time. However, these three attacks seemed to be attracted by something and directly deviated from their predetermined trajectories, heading toward an empty space. Azrael realized something. That was where the sky strike that had started the battle had been fired. Wu Ming's doppelganger raised his left arm and activated the divine artifact level weapon. Activate Arm of Greed. Chapter 438. Wu Ming raised his arm of greed high up. The vambrace on his arm was like a black hole, producing an unparalleled suction force. It was this powerful suction force that attracted pseudo-divine strike, Zeroth void blessing, and marrow explosion. That dark arm of greed was a replica of Nazarik's world-class item, avarice and desireless. After all, Wu Ming had given the real avarice and desireless to Marley. Wu Ming himself didn't need those world-class items, so he didn't want to take them back. In addition, Wu Ming had the ability Create Great Item. Because Create Great Item had an extraordinary effect when used by Wu Ming, even if he couldn't create world-class items, Wu Ming could create them. By the way, because the original ability of avarice and desireless was to absorb the EXP of the dead, Wu Ming modified the pseudo-avarice and desireless he created. Therefore, in order to create the two black and white arms of avarice and desireless, Wu Ming consumed a lot of magical power. That was why the battle began in the middle of the night. Wu Ming wanted to recover to his peak state to face the strongest god of war, Artesius. Although it was fine if he didn't recover to his peak state, after all, Wu Ming's magical power was almost infinite. After Wu Ming injected enough magical power into the greedy arm and desireless arm to last for the night, and a lot of magical power needed to activate them, Wu Ming handed the desireless arm to Wu Ming, while Wu Ming himself held the greedy arm. After using the weapon given by Shiobi to release the simulated Sky Strike, Wu Ming used Dependent to split his clone, while his main body rushed directly to the world where Artesius was. Wu Ming's clone stayed in place, wearing the greedy arm left by his main body, and began the second step of the plan. When Wu Ming's Dependent split into two clones, those two clones had 50% of the main body's ability. In other words, the clone with Shiobi and the clone with the greedy arm were weakened. However, the task of the two clones was not to fight, so it didn't matter whether their strength was weakened or not. Ignoring the avatar that was with Shiobi for the time being, it didn't matter even if the avatar that was left behind by Silent and wearing the arm of greed was attacked. Therefore, the clone with the greedy arm's mission was to die. After Wu Ming transformed avarice and desireless no longer collected EXP, it collected power to collect it. In short, it became the ability to store skills and transform them to be released. At present, through the greedy arm, the super skills of Skywing, Forest Elves, and Goblins such as Pseudo-Divine Strike, Zeroth Void Blessing, and Marrow Explosion were all absorbed and stored. The desireless arm, which had the ability to connect with the greedy arm, was responsible for releasing those skills again. The wielder of the desireless arm was Rieker. Now, he was waiting at the target location planned by Wu Ming and Rieker. Waiting for Wu Ming to transfer the attacks of Skywing, Forest Elves, and Goblins to the greedy arm, then Rieker would launch the desireless arm, releasing the huge attack stored in it, directly penetrating the core of the planet, and then Rieker would obtain the Star Cup. In this way, the war was over. The reason why Artesius didn't show up when Skywing launched the attack was because Wu Ming planned to take advantage of the situation while they were fighting. As if there was no boundary, the farthest place where Artesius was located exuded elf-like energy particles. The ground was some marble slabs, and in the center of the space, a white jade throne was placed there. That was Artesius's temple. A muscular man with multiple pairs of wings behind him, wearing a white robe similar to the ancient Greek style, sat on the white jade throne with his eyes closed. If one looked closely, the wings behind the man were almost identical to the wings of Skywing, except that he had 18 pairs of wings instead of 1 pair. There was no doubt that this man was the creator of Skywing, the strongest god of war, Artesius. Suddenly, an oval black portal appeared in that space, and Wu Ming's figure appeared from it. Artesius's temple naturally had resistance to space and time. Even Skywing, who could penetrate space at will, couldn't enter Artesius's temple unless Artesius allowed it. Wu Ming's portal skill was also a space manipulation skill in that world, but Wu Ming's portal easily passed through Artesius's temple. That was because of Wu Ming's Magus Incarnation ability. Magus Incarnation had the effect of enhancing the magic used, and Wu Ming's double incarnation ability doubled the effect directly. As a result, the temple, which originally couldn't be passed through, became accessible. This was also the reason why Wu Ming was able to enter the forest elite fleet that was equipped with spatial defensive tactics. After arriving at the temple, Razan frowned. That temple was full of fighting intent, killing intent, blood, and everything related to war. Wu Ming didn't like it very much. However, now was not the time to care about that kind of thing. Immediately, Wu Ming turned his gaze to the throne and looked at Artesius, whose eyes were closed. "Are you Artesius? You really look like a Skywing," Wu Ming said casually, looking quite relaxed. Hearing Wu Ming's voice, Arthas opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with intense battle intent, killing intent, and bloodthirst. It was a chilling sight. Wu Ming once heard that if you looked directly into the eyes of Skywing, you would see death. Now, Wu Ming said that if you looked directly into the eyes of Artesius, the creator of Skywing, you would also see death. Do you boring gods really create things based on your own appearance? Wu Ming said somewhat uninterestedly. You're finally here, god of another world. Artesius ignored Wu Ming's ridicule and began his speech. I've waited for too long. There's no one in this world who can defeat me. Only a different world can defeat me. Hearing Artesius's words, Wu Ming smiled. You have the same temperament as that god Welslana. He's also been looking for someone who can defeat him. After Wu Ming finished speaking, Artesius's eyes lit up. There's actually such a person in another world. If I can see that god Welslana, I'll definitely fight him. However, you won't have the chance. Wu Ming began to move. His legs moved toward Artesius. His speed became faster and faster. In an instant, Wu Ming's figure disappeared in front of Artesius. Immediately after, Wu Ming's voice came from behind Artesius. I've already defeated him. Today you'll be the same. Chapter 439. Wu Ming's voice fell, and a sword light swept across Artemisia's neck. Bang! A sound like a collision of steel came. Artemisio raised his hand and caught the incoming sword of salvation with one hand. A trace of blood flowed from Wu Ming's blade and Artemisio's palm. Not to mention that the entire temple is my perception field, I have a good understanding of space. Don't try to show off your meager skill in front of an expert. Artemisio didn't care about the pain and blood and said calmly. Instead, the blood made Artemisio more energetic. That's right, what Wu Ming used just now was not the Phoenix Incarnation's lightning speed, but a simple space transfer magic. Although Wu Ming didn't use it before, it didn't mean that Wu Ming didn't know how to use it. It's just a simple test of your power. It's not like I'm displaying my slight skill in front of an expert. After saying that, Wu Ming once again used spatial transference magic and returned to his original position. Then, let's get started, Artemisio. Wu Ming brandished his divine blade of salvation, which was shaped like Excalibur, and pointed its tip at Arthu. As you wish. After Artemisia finished speaking, his figure disappeared. There was no doubt that this was a more advanced space ability than the Skywings. At the moment when Artemisia disappeared, Wuming waved his sword fiercely behind him. Bang! The sound of steel colliding came again, and Wuming and Artemisia were shaken back. What a terrifying space ability, Artemisia. Wuming looked at Artemisia seriously. Although Wuming was called the Root Dragon and had the ability to adapt to space and time, it was basically passive. It could be said that he didn't have the slightest active skill. It could be said that the only time and space ability he had was the Phoenix incarnation and the space transfer magic. It could only be said that Wuming was still too young. Perhaps he would have to wait until he reached adulthood to fully master the space ability. As for the Root Dragon, cough, forget it, let's find another way. While Wuming spoke, Artesio also looked at his hand. There was a small bloodstain on his palm and a thick bloodstain on the back of his hand. These were all caused by Wuming's divine blade of salvation. The former was caused by Wuming being grabbed by Artesio when he ambushed him. With his self-healing ability, the wound was almost healed. The latter was a wound caused by Arthas's sneak attack on Wuming and the collision with Wuming's divine blade of salvation. The burning pain was transmitted to Arthas's nerves. Immediately, Arthu activated Spirit, and the two wounds healed instantly. I didn't think that just contact and collision would be able to hurt me. As expected of a product from another world. I'm getting excited. Due to his injuries, the battle intent in Arte's eyes burned even brighter. This is the divine blade of salvation that killed countless god-slayers. Not only that, but it also killed a lot of gods. Wuming said to Arthas with a raging smile on his face. When Rama held the divine blade of salvation as the last king, in addition to killing god-slayers, he also killed other disobedient gods. After all, not all disobedient gods were on good terms with the last king. Just like Velaslana, if he met Rama, he would definitely challenge him until he died. Even Rama himself forgot how many enemies he killed, which meant that the enemy was not only the god-slayers, but also the disobedient gods. The divine blade of salvation, huh? Then let me see its power. After that, Arthas gathered energy in the palm of his hand and formed a dark blade. Then, Arthas pointed the blade at Wuming. Arthas hoped that someone could defeat him even if he died. However, this did not mean that Arthas would go easy on the opponent. To Arthas, defeating an opponent that he could not defeat was just a dream. However, Arthas especially hoped that this dream would come true. Therefore, Arthas would use all his strength to defeat Wuming. He's coming, you're a traveler from another world. Arthu roared angrily and sped up toward Wuming. I have a name. Just call me Wuming. Wuming, like Arthas, roared and rushed toward Arthas with the divine blade of salvation. Bang! Two extremely powerful weapons collided with each other, creating a huge boom. Even the air was faintly distorted. Like a signal to start, the sounds of weapons colliding became more and more frequent, and the speed was getting faster and faster. Bang, 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 bang. The two of them kept swinging their weapons at a speed that ordinary people could not see. Whether it was Wuming or Arthas, both of them were simply swinging their swords. Using their reflexes and their own reaction speed, the two of them kept attacking each other with all kinds of skills. The two of them kept moving around the temple. Countless sword and saber lights were emitted from the space between the two of them. Those were simple physical impacts caused by the speed and power of the attacks being too fast. The marble floor of the temple was destroyed by the two of them like tofu. Traces of chaos appeared everywhere in the temple. Even the throne of the temple was damaged. It was enough to show the intensity of the battle between the two of them. Bang! Suddenly, Wu Ming and Artemis separated and stared at each other. I didn't expect you to be able to surpass me in hand-to-hand combat. I'm so happy. Arthas smiled like a Spartan as he looked at Wu Ming excitedly. This was taught to me by my master, the Godslayer. Coupled with years of practice, I naturally have such martial arts. I'm quite interested in your martial arts, Arthas. After all, Arthas was born as a god of war and had always been the strongest. Wu Ming originally thought that Arthas would not be so meticulous in this aspect. As a god born from heaven and earth, shouldn't they generally be able to defeat their enemies with one move or use powerful magic? However, not only was Arthas able to fight Wu Ming in hand-to-hand combat, but he was also not at a disadvantage. This was beyond Wu Ming's expectations. Not only that, but Wu Ming also found that Arthas's martial arts did not seem like talent. That was why he raised this question. Then, Arthas answered Wu Ming's question. My strongest name indeed comes from my powerful ability, Divine Strike. However, as the god of war, how can I not know martial arts? That's right. The god of war did not just mean the god of war, but also the god of war. That was why Arthas was able to fight Wu Ming in hand-to-hand combat. But even so, you've reached the end of your road. As soon as Wu Ming finished speaking, the sword in Arthas's hand shattered instantly. It could not be helped. The sword was only created temporarily by Arthas using the energy in his body. Naturally, it was not as good as Wu Ming's divine sword of salvation. It was a miracle that Arthas was able to hold on for so long in hand-to-hand combat with Wu Ming. Arthas did not have a specific weapon. As the strongest god of war, his body was the best weapon. The collision with Wu Ming's divine sword of salvation proved this point. However, Arthas would not be foolish enough to go head-to-head with his opponent's divine weapon. In that case, I'll let you have a taste of my magic. Chapter 440. After Arthas finished speaking, his figure instantly disappeared and merged into the void. Immediately, the entire space in the temple began to fluctuate. Because I'm the god of war, I don't know much magic other than melee combat, and I'm not going to use magic. In that case, I only have one move left, and that is Divine Strike. That was the upgraded version of Skywing Race's Divine Strike. No. To be precise, Skywing Race's Divine Strike was an inferior version of Arthas' Divine Strike. As the creator of Skywing Race, Arthas could use all of Skywing Race's abilities. However, even though Arthas said that he didn't have many moves, the hand-to-hand combat just now was enough to prove that he was worthy of being called the god of war. However, Arthas wasn't going to use Divine Strike. Instead, he was going to use Sky Strike. You just released a simulated Sky Strike, right? Then let's see how strong my Sky Strike is. Before Wu Ming could react, Arthas' voice stopped abruptly, and the elves in the entire space instantly rioted. That was the fear of death that the elves, who were living energy, had. Sky Strike. There was no fancy incantation, nor was there any fancy preparation. Arthas only said that, and in an instant, a terrifying energy locked onto Wu Ming. Wu Ming could feel that it was more powerful than the Sky Strike he released with the simulated armor. Boom! The explosion occurred in the temple, which was not very big, and the flames produced by the explosion covered the entire temple. Arthas' figure emerged from the space, looking at Wu Ming's position in the temple, slightly surprised. Now, there was a huge and strange semicircular shield at Silent Cry's position. But upon closer inspection, it wasn't a semicircular shield at all. It was clearly a semicircular defensive barrier formed by countless shields stacked together. I didn't expect you to have such a trick, Arthas praised. As if hearing Arthas' praise, the defensive barrier formed by the shields moved. Crack. With a burst of cracking sound, the shields that formed the defensive barrier disintegrated, revealing Wu Ming's figure. The divine sword of salvation in his hand turned into a Manchala square that only revealed a few grids, floating behind Wu Ming. Buzz, Manchala's square formation shook slightly, and countless empty squares appeared behind Wu Ming. Then, these dozens of shields were like swallows returning to their nest, all of them safely and automatically entering the squares. All the shields went into all the empty squares, no more, no less. Subsequently, the Manchala square condensed and turned into a shining platinum holy sword. It was the divine sword of salvation. Those shields were the Manchala square's divine sword of salvation's divine sword. The moment Arthas released the sky attack, Wu Ming turned the divine sword of salvation into the Manchala square. He took out the countless defensive equipment stored in the Manchala square to form a semicircular defensive barrier. When Wu Ming was in the God Slayer's world, The holy sword light cannon that he released was blocked by the Aegis shield in the Manchala square by the last king, Rama. However, that was a god's clone after all. Meanwhile, Arthas, who was facing Wu Ming, was the real god of this world. Wu Ming dared not be careless, so he surrounded himself with tens of shields. Although Wu Ming would not die even if he was hit by the sky attack, who would want to take it head-on if they could defend themselves? I see. Is that the function of this divine weapon? It's a great weapon. Even I want to take it for myself. Arthas had a smile on his face. He was excited to have an opponent who could defeat him. Come at me if you can, Artemisia. I have a lot of treasures. Wu Ming was not mad at Arthas for being a robber. Instead, he encouraged Arthas while smiling. Try my god relic barrage next, Arthas. Wu Ming tossed the divine sword of salvation behind him as soon as he was done speaking. There were ripples in the air as if it had melted into water. Subsequently, countless illusory grids appeared behind Wu Ming. The countless swords, sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and other weapons in the grids were aimed at Arthas. Subsequently, countless god relics were shot at Arthas as he frowned. You can't hurt me if that's all you've got. Arthas used his spatial ability to hide in an alternate dimension as he spoke. However, Wu Ming had no intention of stopping at all. Instead, he sped up the speed of the god relic's barrage. Bang, 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 bang. Wave after wave of god relics were shot at where Arthas was hiding. All of the god relics hit the ground directly, causing an intense explosion. It was only natural that such an outcome would happen because Arthas had already entered an alternate dimension. However, some of the weapons were distorted when they passed through the alternate dimension that Arthas was hiding in. Wu Ming stopped the god relic's barrage and retrieved all of them with the Manchala formation's retrieval function. Arthas, who had just emerged from the alternate dimension, was next. At the moment, there were wounds all over his body. There were even a couple of piercing wounds on his chest and abdomen. I can't believe you have a god relic that can pierce through dimensions. Arthas frowned. That was right. There were a couple of god relics that could pierce through dimensions hidden among the god relics. As Arthas was careless, the god relics hurt him when they pierced through his body. Apart from that, the god relics were on par with grade A relics. It was a piece of cake for them to break through Arthas's defense. Wu Ming was surprised that there were only a couple of piercing wounds on Arthas when there were so many god relics at the same time. However, it did not matter to him. So, I've broken through your dimensional ability, Arthas. Wu Ming smiled at Arthas. Now, Arthas could no longer use his dimensional ability to avoid being hurt. If Lin Huang were to use a skill that targeted space and crushed Arthas's divine marrow, Arthas would die. Arthas wanted someone to defeat him. He did not mind being killed, but he did not want to die in such a humiliating way. The reason why Arthas was still alive despite having so many piercing wounds on his body was that his divine marrow was not hit. In other words, Arthas had protected his divine marrow when he was attacked. However, even if he managed to protect his divine marrow, Arthas would not choose to use his dimensional ability to dodge Wu Ming's god relic's barrage again. First of all, he would really die if Lin Huang managed to break through his divine marrow's defense. Moreover, Arthas was a god of combat. He knew that the best defense was offense. I don't like defense. Attacking suits me better. Arthas's eyes gleamed as soon as he was done speaking. An energy sword appeared in his hand again. Then I'll be a little more serious. Then, the two of them began to fight again. Chapter 441. Wu Ming and Artesio's battlefield had changed. Wu Ming felt that Artesio's war god temple was too small, so he took out the staff of Anziwergen and activated the inherent barrier. Artesio was not afraid of the enemy's home ground. Instead, he was more excited. Although the body was made by Wu Ming's main body, the staff of Anziwergen and other items in Wu Ming's Dragoness dimension were real. The principle was to open a new door in Wu Ming's Dragoness dimension. That door was the secret pattern on the root dragon's body made by Wu Ming, so those items were real. The third floor of the great underground tomb of Nizalik. Wu Ming's figure shuttled through the tomb temple on the third floor, followed by a white figure. It was Artesio. The first floor and the second floor were directly destroyed by Wu Ming and Artesio, so the two's battlefield came to the tomb temple on the third floor. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you curses. Evil people can't hit me. After that, Wu Ming's figure disappeared from Artesio's eyes. Huh? Space-time manipulation? Artesio was worthy of being an expert in space-time manipulation. He recognized the nature of the Phoenix incarnation at a glance. Sure enough, you saw through it. Wu Ming's voice came from the void. Because he was too fast, his voice sounded like it came from all directions. The Phoenix incarnation was said to speed up his speed, but the principle was to enter the lightning speed state. That lightning speed state actually allowed him to enter a different accelerated space from this spacetime. In this space, everything became incomparably slow, and one's body also gained the ability to accelerate by a small margin. However, the price was an overload on one's body. If a new Godslayer were to use this skill, his body would experience severe pain due to overload in less than a minute. But for Wu Ming, the root dragon, who had extremely high physical fitness, that was not a problem at all. That was why Wu Ming could use Phoenix without any side effects. Come and feel my space-time manipulation. After Wu Ming finished speaking, he suddenly appeared behind Artemisio. Artemisio, on the other hand, was too shocked by Wu Ming's methods to react. Thus, there was a short lapse in his memory. However, compared to a battle between experts, this moment of inattention would often become the key to victory or defeat. Go down. After saying that, Wu Ming immediately raised his divine power, which was enchanted with Giant's instant cast, and smashed it toward Artesius's heart. Boom! In an instant, Arthu's figure was buried under the dark stone slabs of the Temple of Tombs. At the same time, the entire floor of the third floor shattered. In short, just like the first and second floor, the entire third floor was destroyed. Boom! Accompanied by a loud roar, the sky above the fourth floor of the underground lake seemed to be broken, and countless broken stones and other things came to the fourth floor of the underground lake. Plop, plop, plop. Accompanied by the sound of countless stones falling into the water, Wu Ming's figure floated above the lake. Wu Ming looked at the lake vigilantly. The blow just now did hit Artesio's heart, but Wu Ming had a feeling that Artesio was not dead yet. Although Wu Ming hid his 12 incarnations ability to surprise Artesio, he successfully used Phoenix to speed up Artesio, and then used Giant's power to hit Artesio. However, Artesio must have some means to avoid fatal injuries. Wu Ming heard from Shiobi that if you want to kill a god, you must destroy the god's divine essence. Just like human heart and brain, the divine essence was the root of the god. The Elven Corridor was also the first to give birth to the god's divine essence. However, unlike human heart and brain, the god's divine essence was not necessarily in the heart, and it might not even be in the brain, but in any part of the body. Moreover, the god's weakness was really only the divine essence. Unlike human heart and brain, serious injuries to other parts of the body may also be fatal. The god's body was not afraid of physical damage. In fact, the god's body was a practical skin bag. As long as the divine essence was intact, the god could even abandon the body and make another one. Wu Ming did hit Artesio's heart just now. Under that kind of attack, even Artesio's body should be dead if the divine essence was in the heart. Since Wu Ming could still feel that Artesio was still alive, it meant that Artesio's divine essence was probably not in the heart. Not to mention that Wu Ming put a lot of effort in order to kill Artesio with one blow. Wu Ming's current divine essence was not as powerful as his original body, so he could only use his 12 incarnations one by one, and their power was greatly reduced. In addition, he couldn't use double incarnations normally. The Titan incarnation just now could be so powerful because of overload, but also because of that, Wu Ming's Titan ability was temporarily unavailable. Because Wu Ming used Titan incarnation, the slate representing Titan incarnation in Wu Ming's heart was in a blood-red state, which meant that this ability was temporarily unavailable. That was the price of instantaneous power, but it was also the price of overloading, and that price would take about 3 days. Titan incarnation was Wu Ming's most commonly used ability. After all, it was simple and crude. Now that this ability was sealed, Wu Ming could be said to have lost a great help. However, it couldn't be said to be absolute. Simply put, it wasn't a big deal. Then, Artesio flew out of the underground lake. Sure enough, although Artesio was in a mess, and his heart was protruding, Artesio did not show any signs of dying. There was no doubt that the spirit essence was not in his heart. Because Wu Ming attacked from behind, the left part of his chest that was covered by his clothes bulged. Speaking of which, the scene of a man's chest bulging was too beautiful to believe. You wanted to hit my spirit essence from the beginning? That's a good plan. Although Wu Ming didn't use any tricks at all. I have to say, you're really a monster, Artesio. Even if Wu Ming didn't hit his spirit essence, he should have been affected by Wu Ming's Titan incarnation, but Artesio didn't show any signs of damage. Haha. I am the strongest god of war, the god of war. Artesio roared, and the spirit essence in his body was activated, and all the damage on his body was healed. He looked just like when he first met Wu Ming. You should have more trump cards, right? I know I'm going to lose soon, but my pride won't allow me to admit defeat. Artesio was really smart. He also knew that he would be defeated by Wu Ming later, so he said it bluntly. In that case, I will bet everything I have to release this final divine strike. Chapter 442. The gods of Disboard were not weak, but even so, they were not that strong. The Skywing species had killed gods, the Kikai species had the ability to kill gods, and the forest goblins and goblins had developed weapons that could kill gods. Through these, it was clear that gods were not unkillable. In fact, to put it simply, a god was a creature that was stronger than other creatures. Wu Ming was a god, wasn't he? Therefore, although Wu Ming was wary of the gods of this world, he did not take them too seriously. Putting aside the fact that Wu Ming, who was a god slayer, was the natural enemy of these gods, Wu Ming had 12 clones that were comparable to 12 relics and the divine sword of salvation that contained almost all mythical god relics. Not to mention, the divine sword of salvation was powerful. It was a holy sword that had the power to split a star. Then, after Wu Ming met Arceus, he did not think that the gods of this world were weak. Although he was prepared for it, Arceus's strength still surprised Wu Ming. Arceus's powerful body could fight Wu Ming to a standstill. His martial arts skills were not invincible, but they were not weaker than Wu Ming's. He was only slightly weaker in hand-to-hand combat with Wu Ming. His almost endless spirit energy was used to power his powerful sky attack, and its power was comparable to the Skywing's divine sword. Arceus could kill gods, so it was not unreasonable for him to be called the most powerful god of war. However, that did not mean that Wu Ming was afraid of him. Wu Ming had already estimated that only Arceus, who was known as the most powerful god of war, could fight him. Arceus was slightly weaker than Wu Ming in hand-to-hand combat. His sky attack could not break through the defense of Wu Ming's god relic shield, and his hiding space could be broken. Moreover, Wu Ming could adapt to time and space, so he was immune to most of the damage and skill effects in time and space. It could be said that Wu Ming had the upper hand over Arceus. When Arceus saw Wu Ming, he felt a little uneasy. I'm no match for him. This was Arceus' thought. However, Arceus did not believe in empty words, nor would he bow down to Kiran's overbearing aura. Only when he was completely defeated or even killed would Arceus admit that he was the strongest god of war. But his wish to be defeated had been fulfilled. Thus, Arceus and Wu Ming began fighting one-on-one. He did not even bother with his Skywing subordinates, which was why Arceus did not show up. The Skywing species had been created by Arceus as a weapon to kill him. However, Arceus was not a pedantic person. After knowing that his creations could not kill him, Arceus did not count on the Skywing species. It was rare for him to meet someone who could defeat him. Arceus was excited. However, after using so many means, both Wu Ming and Arceus knew that even if the two of them continued to fight normally, they would not be able to finish it in a short time. Arthas did not like to drag things out. He was ready to use his ultimate move. Wuming, on the other hand, was passive. In fact, the battle with Arthas was not bad. Wuming did not want to end it so quickly, but if it was his opponent's opinion, Wuming would still respect it. Then, I'll also prepare a big one. After Wuming said that, he let go of the Sword of Salvation, and the Sword of Salvation merged into Wuming's body like a spirit. Immediately, Wuming raised his right hand and began to gather magical power. In Wuming's inner world, there were 10 small stone plates on the huge stone plate, one of which was already shining red. That was the stone plate representing the Titan. Immediately, the pointer in the center of the stone plate turned, and the long and short pointers pointed to the stone plate at 11 o'clock. The stone plate was engraved with a slowly burning sun, which made people feel hot just by looking at it. In an instant, the stone plate representing the incarnation of the sun turned scarlet, which meant that the sun stone plate could no longer be used. For victory, come to me quickly. Immortal sun, please grant me a shining steed. Spirited horse, with the lifeline of my origin dragon, I bestow upon the eternal glory. Bring me the shining wheel of light that symbolizes me. With Wuming's words, a small fireball appeared in Wuming's hand. In an instant, the small fireball continued to expand and became extremely huge in an instant. Inside the fireball, the shape of a steed could be vaguely seen. The steed was constantly restless, and the fireball exuded intense heat. The extremely high temperature made the space begin to distort, and it felt like it was going to break. Wuming looked at Arthas on the opposite side. At that moment, a large number of spirits flashed around Arthas's body, and the sky above the underground lake on the 4th floor of Nazalik instantly became dim. A huge cloud tornado slowly hovered above Arthas's head. Arthas was even more flashy than Wuming. Divine strike. Arthas's voice fell, and a huge pillar like a huge holy sword beam connected to Arthas through the cloud tornado above the sky, and countless energy spewed toward Wuming. Wuming simply gathered his power and then threw it in the direction of Arthas's divine strike. In the process of throwing, the fireball expanded a lot again, and it really looked like the sun. At that moment, the entire 4th floor space was shattered at a speed visible to the naked eye, which was the precursor of the 2 powerful attacks about to collide. Boom! The sun and the light pillar collided, causing an extremely violent explosion. The explosion covered the entire Nazalik. The strong attack destroyed the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th floors of Nazalik. The underground tomb of Nazalik disappeared. It couldn't withstand the double destruction of Divine Strike and the sun. After the barrier of Nazalik was broken, the damage caused by the 2 attacks also began to affect Arthas's temple. In just an instant, Arthas's temple melted. In the outside world, Shik was dumbfounded as he watched his team's attacks being diverted to another direction. Shankar was very smart. How could he not understand what was going on? It was clear that his Zeroth Ward of the Void was used by someone else. Retreat. Shankar immediately ordered. Yes. The captain immediately ordered the fleet to retreat. They didn't know who the enemy was, so it was unwise to attack rashly. Obviously, the goblins on the opposite side also thought the same. The goblins' magic airship also began to slowly retreat. At that moment, a huge crack appeared in the space above Abendheim. Immediately, like glass breaking, the space above Abendheim shattered. Boom! Chapter 443. Above Abendheim, all the Skywings had shrunk to the size of 10-year-old children because they had all unleashed the pseudo-divine strike together. Their original plan was to get rid of the forest goblins and goblins in one fell swoop, so the Skywings had converted all their energy into Sky Strike and gathered it into that pseudo-god strike. The Skywings' special characteristic was that after unleashing all their energy, their bodies would rapidly shrink after unleashing their Sky Strikes. What a disgusting curse. Slurp. Wipe away your saliva. At the same time, their combat strength was also greatly reduced. Although it was not to the point where they could kill just about anyone, the Skywings found it hard to resist against creatures like forest fairies, goblins, orcs, and vampires. When Azriel saw that her sister's attacks had been diverted, she understood that they had fallen into a trap. Not only that, but the forest fairies and gnomes had also fallen into a trap. The Forest Elite Species Alliance, the Gnome Species Alliance, and the Winged Species Alliance had all been set up. Now, it was certain that the two sky strikes that had been unleashed by an unknown person were from the unknown person who had set the trap for the Skywings. Damn it, I can't continue fighting like this. Abent, I'm begging you, meow. Azriel patted the ground beneath her weakly. The entire residence of the Skywing species was occupied by the huge fantasy breed, Abentheim. After Azriel finished speaking, a ripple appeared. It was Abentheim nodding. Even if the Skywings could no longer fight, there was still Abentheim, a fantasy breed that had been personally named by Arceus. A fantasy breed that could catch Arceus's eye and was willing to follow him could not possibly be weak. After all, even though Arceus the god of war was a stubborn old man who had a death wish, he truly acknowledged the strong. However, at this moment, the space above the Skywings, or rather, above Abentheim, shattered. Bang! Like glass shattering, the space above Abentheim exploded. The shattered space shards rained down on Abentheim. What happened, meow? Azriel said uneasily. The reason why she felt uneasy was because she had sensed the aura of her master, the god of war Arceus, from the shattered space. It was an extremely weak aura, giving people the feeling that she was about to dissipate and die. However, Azriel did not think that anyone could defeat or kill her mistress. Therefore, her mistress was the strongest. Azriel was not the only one who thought this. The other Skywings thought the same. In their eyes, their master was the strongest, and there was simply no one who could defeat him. However, just as the Forest Sprite Alliance and the Gnome Alliance were about to retreat, and the Skywings were lost in their fantasies, a figure flew out of the shattered space, or rather, fell out. Arthur used his 18 wings to adjust his body and slowly landed on Abentheim, right in front of the Skywings. Wuming also came out of the shattered space right after Artexiu. Wuming was not in a hurry to chase after Artexiu. He turned around and began to speed up the repair of the shattered space. Although this broken space was automatically repairing itself, if someone who had mastered spatial technology took the initiative to repair it, it could still speed up the repair of the broken space. During this time, Azriel and the others hurriedly went to Artexiu's side and got down on one knee to salute him. Lord Artexiu? Azriel sorrowfully said. She could sense that her master's spirit essence was gone, and his aura was weakening bit by bit. It could be said that Artexiu was already very strong to have been able to hold on for so long. That was also the reason why Wuming didn't rush to catch up with Artesio, because under the double explosion of Divine Strike and Sun, which destroyed 2 small worlds, Artesio was undoubtedly affected, and his spirit essence was also shattered because of it. In short, Artexiu had already lost. His spirit essence had been completely destroyed by Wuming. Seeing that Azriel wanted to say something, Artexiu directly waved his hand to stop her. This battle really made me happy. I'm very satisfied. I'm very happy, ha. Artexiu's laughter spread from Abentheim to the surrounding area. The Forest Elves Alliance and the Goblin Alliance could already hear it. Even so, Hink Nilbar had no intention of going back to collect the heads. He would undoubtedly die if he did. After all, the person who defeated Artesius was still repairing the shattered space above Abentheim. Roar! At that moment, a dragon roared, and a huge dragon rose from the ground behind the Forest Elves Alliance, roaring and rushing toward Artexia's direction. Immediately afterward, 6 more dragon shadows flew from the back of the Forest Elves Alliance, following the dragon in front, rushing toward Artexiu. Artexiu once killed the leader of those dragons, the Dragon King of the Forest Elves Alliance. Therefore, the Forest Elves Alliance not only became enemies with the Kikai Elves Alliance, but also had quite an irreconcilable hatred with Artexiu. Of course, the Forest Elves Alliance wasn't happy to kill their leader, and it just so happened that Artexiu was extremely weak now, and one of the Forest Elves Alliance could kill him. But because of the anger of the Forest Elves Alliance, they all rushed out after ignoring Hink's signal to retreat. and they were ready to kill the enemy with all their strength. Bending whistle. 2 words came out of the Forest Elves Alliance's mouth, bending whistle. It was something similar to the Sky Strike. After releasing Sky Strike, the Sky Strike would turn the Sky Strike into a 10-year-old child's body, and its power would be suppressed. It could be described as a big killer move, because either the opponent would die, or the Forest Elves Alliance would die because they had no power. It was that simple. The Forest Elves Alliance's bending whistle was a powerful skill that condensed the whole body's vitality and magical power to release everything. That was also a big killer move. Whether the opponent died or not, the Forest Elves Alliance would definitely die. However, that also represented how irreconcilable the Forest Elves Alliance and Artexiu were. In an instant, the first Forest Elves Alliance opened its mouth, and its whole body's energy and vitality were condensing. The leader of the Forest Elves Alliance was ready to release its full attack at the cost of its life. Roar! Not only that, but the 6 Forest Elves Alliance behind it also began to prepare to launch Bending Whistle. It seemed that those Forest Elves Alliance also had the idea of destroying all the Skywing Elves Alliance, so they launched that fatal attack. However, Wuming wouldn't just stand by and watch. In those few seconds, Wuming repaired the broken space in the sky and used space teleportation to reach the path of Bending Whistle. In an instant, Wuming took out the golden ball from his golden ripple and used it again. Mechanical armor covered Wuming's body. Pseudo-Dragon Roar. Chapter 444. Pseudo-Dragon's Roar. As Wuming's voice fell, Wuming raised his hand, and a terrifying dragon breath burst out from the barrel in Wuming's hand. The huge dragon breath collided with the 6 incoming dragon breaths, and Wuming's pseudo-dragon's roar instantly engulfed them. Looking at Wuming's attack, the leading dragon spirit was instantly shocked, and at the same time, anger rushed to the dragon spirit's heart. That's Dragon Breath of Master Wuming? It's that damn Jikai. However, before the leader of the dragon elite could finish his sentence, he was engulfed in flames. The extremely hot dragon's roar's power did not diminish. It followed the direction of the 6 dragon breaths and instantly engulfed the 6 flying dragon shadows. After the 6 dragon spirits used Collapse Roar, their physical skills were quickly disintegrated, and the 2 sides were too close. The dragon spirits had no time to escape. Even if they escaped, with their bodies that had begun to collapse, they would not live long. In just a few breaths, the 6 powerful dragon spirits' attacks were disintegrated by Wuming, and not even ashes were left. This scene made the forest goblins, and other races widen their eyes. Even the superior life forms such as the Skywing, Fantasy, and Giant races could not wipe out the 6 dragon goblins in a few breaths of time while fighting alone. Only the Divine race, or the Kikai race that could replicate powerful attacks, could do it. Schenker saw Wuming's figure through the long-distance perspective magic, and his pupils shrank instantly. It's him! The captain of the forest spirit next to Schenker was also surprised. After all, when Wuming came to the forest spirit fleet, only Schenker and the captain saw Wuming's face. Looking at Wuming's Kikai race equipment, Schenker had already guessed the whole story. Wu Ming somehow managed to get his hands on a piece of equipment belonging to the mecha race. Using a method unknown to Schick, he was able to analyze and utilize that device. A few days ago, Wu Ming first accidentally broke into the goblins' territory and then came to the forest spirit fleet, providing information to the forest spirits for free, probably for this moment. It was clear that the goblins had also come to Iliala because of silence methods, forming a tripartite balance of forces with the Skywings and the Forest Goblin Alliance. Later, Wuming used the Kikai race's weapon to simulate Skystrike and attacked their forces and the Goblin fleet, causing the 2 sides to launch weapons against the Skywing race. In order to counterattack, the Skywing race also used their strongest move. As a result, the attacks from the 3 sides were inexplicably attracted to other places and disappeared at a visible speed. There was no doubt that it was Wuming was behind it. Although they didn't know where their attacks disappeared, there was no doubt that it was not a good thing. Are the forest spirits ready to use the teleportation spell against the fleet? Because of the sense of crisis, Schenker had already ordered people to prepare the teleportation spell, ready to teleport the entire forest spirit fleet away. Yes. We're ready, and we're just waiting for your order, the captain said calmly as he saluted Schick. If you're ready, just activate it, you idiot. Schenker glared at the captain angrily. We're preparing to escape. Since we're ready, what are we waiting for? Do we want them to attack us? After all, we don't know Wu Ming's current situation, and we don't know if he's a friend or foe. I'll give the order now. The captain was surprised by Schenker's anger. This was the first time he had seen this lord angry. The captain left to inform the teleportation spell, while Schenker still stood at the bow of the warship, looking at Wu Ming, who was using the X-ray vision spell. How dare you toy with me, Schenker Nilbar, in the palm of your hand? Even if you're a god, wait for my revenge. After all, the Zeroth ward of the void that she, Hink Nilbarian, had developed was not for anything else but to slay a god. And the god that Hink Nilbarian wanted to slay the most was the creator of the forest elves, the forest god Canis. As long as there's no more Lord God, Nina and I can be together. Schenker's expression darkened. Accompanied by Schenker's laughter, the entire forest spirit fleet disappeared from the battlefield. At the same time, the goblin's magic airship had turned around. Intense flames erupted from the huge nozzle behind it. Then the entire goblin fleet flew into the distance like a meteor shower. The fairy, dragon, fantasy, and giant species that had cooperated with the two sides were all dead. The fairy was in the forest spirit fleet, while the fantasy and giant species were behind the goblins. When they saw the goblins fleeing, they fled as well. Since their allies had fled, what was the point of them staying here? Thus, only the infant skywing species, fantasy breed Abanti Heim and Arthas, whose body was starting to fade, were left on the battlefield. Wu Ming did not care about the forest spirits and goblins. After eliminating the dragon spirits, Wu Ming landed on Abanti Heim. In an instant, Abendheim exuded a threatening aura, and the Skywing, who had already turned into an infant, nervously looked at Wu Ming, protecting his dying master. Now, no matter how stupid the Skywing species were, they knew that their master, the most powerful war god Arthas, had been defeated, and the price was his life. They're quite loyal to you, Arthas. Wu Ming did not do anything but stood in front of Arthas and said in a light tone, "They are indeed a group of subordinates worthy of my trust. Unfortunately, I didn't pay attention to them in the past," Arthas said calmly. Wu Ming and Artesius didn't look like enemies who had just fought to the death a few minutes ago. Instead, they looked like longtime friends. When Wu Ming's son and Arthas's divine strike destroyed Wu Ming's barrier and arrived at Arthas' temple, Wu Ming's son had already overwhelmed Arthas's divine strike and destroyed Arthas's divine essence in the temple's throne. That's right, the reason why Arthas was unharmed after being hit by Wu Ming's giant was because Arthas's divine essence was not in his body. Arthas was worthy of being called the strongest. To be able to keep his body from dissipating with his divine essence, it could be said that Arthas was truly the strongest in this world. Wu Ming thought so. After that, Wu Ming used the power of flood and annihilation to offset Wu Ming and Arthas's attacks. After all, if the explosion caused by these two forces was allowed to continue expanding, not to mention whether the Skywings and Abendheim, who were closest to the Artexia temple, would be able to survive, the planet would be bombarded with nuclear bombs again. Wu Ming used the power of flood and annihilation at the same time. The all-encompassing water wrapped around the explosion. The power of annihilation annihilated these powers, but the price was that the two avatars were like the sun and the giant. They fell into a red state and could not be used. Then, the temple was destroyed, and Arthu and Wu Ming came here from another dimension. The rest was what happened just now. Immediately, Wu Ming said the key words. "Are you satisfied with this battle, Arthas?" Chapter 445. Are you satisfied with this battle, Arthu? Ha! After Wu Ming asked the question, Arthas started to laugh loudly. He laughed continuously. The Skywings were at a loss as to what to do as they looked at their somewhat crazy master before exchanging glances with each other. On the other hand, Wu Ming didn't say anything and continued to laugh at Arthu. After a few minutes, Arthu stopped laughing and looked at Wu Ming happily. "I'm very satisfied with this battle, Wu Ming. Arthu's only wish was for someone to kill him and give him a defeat. Since you can separate the divine marrow from your main body, why don't you store it somewhere else?" Wu Ming asked. He had not properly protected his only weakness and had instead placed it in the most vulnerable place. No matter how he thought about it, it was somewhat abnormal. Arthu's temple was the battlefield between Wu Ming and Arthu. Although the temple had initially been affected by the shockwaves from their battle, Wu Ming had used the fact that the battlefield was too small to activate the inherent barrier of Nasalic. Wu Ming did not think that Arthu was so wise as to predict that Wu Ming would find Arthu's temple too small and hide his divine marrow in the temple's throne. Unless, of course, Arthu had chosen death. "When you came to this world, I already knew my end," Arthu calmly said as he began to tell a story. "I really don't know you, but the Star Cup told me that if I were to fight you, you would be strong enough to kill me." Arthu's words left Wu Ming puzzled. Star Cup? Could the Star Cup communicate with others? Was that not a scepter that represented the ownership of this planet? I'm not mistaken. That is indeed the Star Cup, but that thing should be a replica or a clone of the Star Cup because the real Star Cup is still in the Elven Corridor. I can sense it. Arthu was a god born in the Elven Corridor where the Star Cup was born, so he naturally had the ability to sense the Star Cup's exact location, though it was very vague. It said that it could give me power. As long as I have it, I can defeat you. The method is very simple. I just need to choose it and hold it with both hands, Arthu continued. However, since Arthu said so, he definitely did not choose to accept the Star Cup's power. I didn't choose that thing's power. As a god of war, taking shortcuts is a disgrace to me. Knowing that he would be defeated and killed, choosing to live with the power given by someone else was extremely ironic to Arthu. My god essence wasn't taken out by myself and placed on the throne of the temple. It was taken out by the Star Cup. Arthu's words shocked Wu Ming. Did the Star Cup come to life? After I rejected the Star Cup, I was ready to use my power to destroy it, but the Star Cup seemed to have been prepared for this. When I rejected it, it took advantage of my momentary distraction and drilled into the divine marrow in my body. Then, under my strong resistance, the Star Cup and my divine marrow were ejected out of my body. After that, the Star Cup sealed my divine marrow in the throne, and the Star Cup disappeared. Listening to Arthu's series of strange words, Wu Ming was dumbfounded. This was really too strange. Logically speaking, the Star Cup was a lifeless symbol of the planet's power, so it should not have come to trouble Arthu without permission. However, Wu Ming did not think that Arthu was lying, because Arthu did not know how to lie at all. He was a real man. However, this also explained why Arthu was not that strong when he fought Wu Ming. In addition to hand-to-hand combat, magic battles, and ordinary chasing attacks, Arthu had also used his ultimate move, Divine Strike. No matter what, Arthu was recognized as the strongest. If that was all he had, it was unlikely that he would be known as the strongest in the world. It turned out that his divine marrow was a little affected. In other words, your true strength is actually more than that? Wu Ming asked. Let's not talk about other things first. The divine strike just now was not much worse than when I was at my peak. Even if I was at my peak, I would have been defeated by you. Arthu was right. If Wu Ming had not used Flood and Annihilation to eliminate the damage that he had sustained, Arthu would have been dead by now. Although Arthu was about to die, his body had now become extremely dim. Arthu also knew that Wu Ming had shown mercy in the end, so he had let go of it now. Having an opponent that he could not defeat even if he used all his strength was quite a good feeling. This was what Arthu was thinking. Then, my friend, what do you think of my previous proposal? Arthu asked a strange question. Before coming out of the shattered alternate space, Arthu and Wu Ming had a short conversation. Arthu had asked Wu Ming to become the new god of the Skywings and Abanti Heim. However, before Wu Ming could reply, Hugh had been drawn out of the alternate space by the increasing spatial shattering and had arrived at Abontiheim. I accept. After all, Wuming had already proven that Wuming had agreed when he had destroyed those dragon spirits. Hugh smiled in relief. Ha! I have only lost once in 100 battles in my life. Meeting you is the happiest thing that has ever happened to me. Hugh was like an old friend to Wuming, looking at Wuming with satisfaction before disappearing. Goodbye, my friend. Wuming watched Hugh disappear. Hugh, who had lost his god's vital spirit essence and had fought fiercely with Wuming, was beyond saving. This was like a servant spirit core. Once the spirit core was shattered, the servant would be forced to leave. There was no other way. However, there should be other ways, such as the Star Cup. However, Hugh had only lost once in 100 battles in this world. This was the path he had chosen, and Wuming would not stop him. It had to be said that Arthas was a good friend. Between Silent Wonder and Arthas, it could be said that they had developed true feelings for each other. At this moment, Wuming suddenly thought of a problem. There was a problem with the Star Cup, a huge problem that could threaten Arthethius. However, even if there was a problem with the Star Cup, the rules of its appearance should not have changed. The only thing left was the most powerful divine soul seed, or rather, the Star Cup piercing through the core of the planet. Now, the Star Cup was about to be released from the planet's core. You guys stay here obediently. Remember to dodge if there is any danger. After Wuming said that, he opened a black portal and instantly went in, leaving behind a group of Skywing infants who did not know what to do and looked at each other. Chapter 446. Moving forward in the timeline, Wuming's clone was using the greedy arm to absorb the attacks of the forest elves, goblins, and Skywing species. The body of Wuming's clone was collapsing at a visible rate, including the pitch-black demon-like greedy arm. After all, this was the ultimate move of the three forces, which was enough to kill a god. Being attracted by the pseudo-greedy arm created by Wuming, there was naturally a price to pay for absorbing it. In addition, Wuming was not a clone of his main body that was currently in the root, but a clone of a clone. Although his strength was still passable, he would not be able to withstand the Zeroth ward of the Void of the Forest Elves, the Marrow explosion of the Goblins, and the Skywing species' collective pseudo-godly strike. The attacks of the three forces were transformed into an energy ball comparable to a large fireball, which was absorbed by Wuming's greedy arm. Because the Forest Elves and Goblins were preparing to retreat, and the Skywing species were turning into infants, no one attacked Wuming, which also allowed Wuming to be at ease. Just like that, by the time the large energy ball was almost completely absorbed, the body of Wuming's clone was almost broken beyond recognition. The greedy arm on the left hand of the clone was already full of cracks, as if it would not be surprising if it shattered at any moment. Bang! Sure enough, the pitch-black greedy arm on Wuming's left hand shattered like a mirror, turning into specks of light that scattered into the air. Fortunately, the desireless arm has already stored these attacks, so there's no need for them, Wuming's clone said weakly like a badly damaged puppet. Immediately afterward, the clone left like a spirit, turning into specks of magic particles starting from its feet and flying into the air with the magic particles of the greedy arm that had not completely dissipated. At the same time, in the southwest direction of the continent of Yar-Ala, a white-haired man wearing a tattered brown cloak, a hood over his head, goggles over his eyes, and a scarf over his mouth and nose came out of a hidden underground cave. He was none other than Rick, who had snuck into the southwestern part of Yar-Ala from Lucia. Because of Wuming's teleportation gate, Wuming only needed to make a trip here, then open the teleportation gate, and Rick could easily come over. Looking at his glove shining, Rick wore a glove on his right hand. It was a glove as beautiful as an angel, white and flawless. This was the twin item that complemented the pitch-black greedy arm. The desireless arm. Rick knew that this meant that Wuming had successfully absorbed the attacks of the three forces. This was Wuming's signal to Rick that he could take action. Then, let me end this war, Rick said in a heavy tone, as if he had taken on a heavy burden. Then, Rick raised his right hand and took out a gemstone with his left hand. It was a crystal that stored magic. He only needed to break it to release the magic within. After all, using the desireless arm required the release of magic. As a human of this world, Rick did not have the energy sprite of this world, nor did he have the magic that Wuming used, so he could not use the desireless arm normally. Wuming gave the crystal to Rick so that he could use it to release the desireless arm. Release, desireless arm. Rick roared and slammed the crystal into the desireless arm. As a counterfeit world-class item, the desireless arm had a rather powerful appearance. When the crystal was slammed into the desireless arm, there was no doubt that the crystal that stored magic was broken. The broken crystal turned into bits of flying debris and disappeared, and the magic in it had been absorbed by the desireless arm. Like a flame that got oil, the desireless arm instantly burst out a powerful airwave, and it began to emit endless white light. Rick looked at the desireless arm that was constantly emitting strong light and airwaves, and Rick remembered Wuming's words. The Villo said, "Imagine a strong penetrating force, and press the liberated desireless arm to the ground under your feet. The energy stored in the desireless arm will penetrate the Earth's core and make the elf corridor appear. In this way, the star cup will also appear." Rick looked at the light in his hand that would end everything and smiled bitterly. For peace, for the future of mankind, for everyone in the village, for his sister, for the followers who were willing to turn into ghosts, for all of this, Rick and even mankind had sacrificed a lot. However, this day had finally arrived. Rick put down the raised desireless arm, aimed at the ground, and prepared to press it down. At this moment, a dark space door suddenly appeared in the sky, and Wuming's figure appeared from it. "There's a problem with the star cup," Wuming shouted at Rick. Rick's pupils shrank, and then he quickly stopped pressing his arm down. "There's a problem with the star cup?" Rick looked at Wuming worriedly. But before Wuming could explain, suddenly, a green figure rushed toward the defenseless Rick. Wuming reacted instantly, and Wuming instantly activated the Phoenix incarnation. Violent energy filled the Phoenix stone plate in Wuming's heart, turning it into a red alert state. If he didn't do this, Wuming didn't have the confidence to save Rick before the green figure. The green figure was too close to Rick, as if deliberately prepared. "Poochie!" "Ugh!" The sound of flesh being separated echoed, and Rick's muffled groan followed. Wuming grabbed Rick and brought him to the side. The green figure held something in her hand and came in front of Wuming. That thing was a pure white glove, like an angel's glove. However, there were traces of blood on the glove, which dyed the angel's arm red. On our side, Rick was sweating profusely. His left hand was hugging his only remaining right arm, and he was sweating profusely. That's right, the green figure took away the desireless arm along with Rick's right hand. At this moment, Wuming also clearly saw the green figure. The one who snatched Rick's arm was a female. She had long ears like the elves of the forest, and her golden hair reached her waist. Although her soft green clothes were a little conservative, they still couldn't completely cover her voluptuous and sexy body. Forest spirit? Rick looked at the woman in front of him with some resentment. "No, I'm afraid that's the creator of the forest spirit, forest god Canis." After sensing the creature in front of him that looked like a forest spirit, Wuming was very sure that her aura was similar to Arceus. Without a doubt, this was a god. Forest god Canis? Rick clearly didn't expect that a small character like him would be targeted by a god. However, Canis is a bit strange. Wuming narrowed his eyes and looked at Canis. Although it was indeed forest god Canis, right now Canis' eyes were lifeless, as if he was a puppet. Wuming more or less guessed the situation. At this moment, Canis grabbed the desireless arm and pressed it to the ground. Boom! In an instant, a huge amount of energy burst out from the ground. Chapter 447. Boom! A huge amount of energy came from underground, and the ground where Wuming and Rick were was completely shattered. Wu-ming had no choice but to bring Rick into the sky. As expected, the target of the manipulated K-Inus was only Rick's right hand, or rather, whether it could pierce through the desireless arm in the Earth's core? Wu-ming said. At this point, Wu-ming could also understand that K-Inus must have accepted the temptation of the Star Cup, accepted the power of the Star Cup, and ended up being manipulated. On the way here, Wu-ming thought that the Star Cup had tempted Arthas. Although Arthas had rejected it, he was still tricked by the Star Cup. Then, wouldn't the Star Cup look for other divine seeds? The answer was no. K-Inus was the new divine seed that the Star Cup was looking for. After K-Inus accepted the temptation of the Star Cup took control of Kaina's body and used him like a puppet. Its purpose was to save itself from the elf corridor. The Star Cup first looked for Arthas because he was the strongest war god, but because Arthas had rejected and wanted to kill itself, the Star Cup paid Arthas a price. Then, the Star Cup looked for K-Inus. And K-Inus was afraid of the horror of being killed, so he accepted the Star Cup's proposal and became the Star Cup's puppet. He was arranged to be next to Rick, and was ready to liberate the real Star Cup in the elf corridor. And when he saw Wu-ming stop Rick's action of piercing through the Earth's core, the enslaved K-Inus directly attacked, snatching Rick's right hand and the desireless arm in his right hand. That was the truth that Wu-ming saw through. What happened to the Star Cup? Wu-ming grabbed Rick and healed him. Then, he frowned as he looked down at the ground that was already rotten beyond repair. The ground was completely destroyed as if it was the epicenter of an earthquake. Originally, if Rick used the desireless arm, the energy of the desireless arm would only have a very small destructive power, but it would directly penetrate the Earth's core with a powerful penetrating force and make the Star Cup appear. However, the desireless arm technique used by Kanas was quite crude. Not only had a portion of the energy leaked out, but it had also caused damage to the surface of the Earth. Furthermore, it hadn't reached the core of the Earth, so it could be said that it was quite a waste. However, since the other party was a god, ordinary judgment could not be used as a reference. Wu-ming frowned as he looked at the black cup-shaped crystal slowly rising from the ground that was still being destroyed. That was undoubtedly the Star Cup. However, there was indeed a huge problem with the Star Cup. The Star Cup shouldn't be black in shape, but a pure white and transparent cup-shaped crystal. Apart from that, Wu-ming also sensed a familiar aura, which originated from the black mud. I didn't expect that even this world would have this black mud. Wu-ming said solemnly as he looked at the black mud that was swaying inside the black crystal like black paste. Wu-ming said with a solemn expression, "I should have known. How could a normal person's voice reach my ears in the space-time tunnel? Only the black mud, which also has the power of the origin, could transmit that voice to my ears." Wu-ming's analysis was correct. The reason why Wu-ming could hear Rick's sigh in the beginning was all because of the black mud. The black mud was deliberately hidden in the elven corridor that was full of elves, so Wu-ming's perception couldn't take effect for a while, so he didn't sense the presence of the black mud. After attracting Wu-ming to this world, the Star Cup that was possessed by the black mud began to plan its escape as if it had its own consciousness. It punished Art-Hugh who resisted it, controlled Kanas who accepted it, seized Rick's right hand, and successfully liberated the Star Cup from the elven corridor. I was tricked. Wu-ming wasn't too angry. This was the power of wisdom. Wu-ming was quite impressed. Even Wu-ming didn't expect a Star Cup that had just developed its own consciousness to be so calculative. "Let's leave here first, Rick. You'll only be a burden if you stay here," Wu-ming said to Rick, whose right arm had stopped bleeding. Rick looked at Wu-ming seriously, then nodded. He knew his own limits. Then, Wu-ming opened the portal and sent Rick in. Before he left, Rick reminded Wu-ming, "Thank you very much for your help, Lord God. I wish you all the best." With that, Rick threw himself into the black portal. Then the portal closed. Wu-ming looked at the Star Cup's position. Just like a strange phenomenon, the liquid in the Star Cup flowed out directly and wrapped around the Star Cup to form a human figure. Then, the human figure took shape and appeared in front of Wu-ming. 18 pairs of white wings, Western clothing that resembled a Greek style, sharp eyes, and a muscular body. There was no doubt that this human figure was the god of war, Arthu, who had just died not long ago. However, Wuming wasn't stupid enough to think that this fake guy in front of him was Arthu. Although the appearance was the same, the aura was completely different. "Oh, are you the dragon of origin? What a familiar stranger," Arthu said in a frivolous tone. There was no doubt that this wasn't Arthu. "It's all thanks to you that I could come out so quickly," Arthu, who was formed by the Star Cup's consciousness, said. If it weren't for Wuming, it would have taken a year and a half for the Star Cup to come out. After all, even in the final battle, Rick had to use other means to penetrate the core. Without Wuming, this time would have been delayed. "You know what you are, don't you?" Wuming looked at the fake Arthu in front of him seriously. Of course. I'm the Star Cup's consciousness. I'm just a tool, an item." "I belong to whoever wins the battle," the Star Cup's consciousness said frivolously, using Arthu's appearance. This annoyed Wuming. It was an insult to the dead. "But thanks to this, I have my own consciousness." The Star Cup's consciousness smiled proudly. Then, it raised one of its hands, and countless black substances appeared on its hand. This was the black origin soil that Wuming was familiar with. "If it's you, you must recognize this as well. This thing tells me that you're an enemy." The Star Cup's consciousness smiled at Wuming. Wuming closed his eyes, then let out a long breath. This was a little troublesome. Wuming had thought about what would happen if the big shots of each world were swallowed by the black origin soil. Although Xingxue wasn't considered a big shot, Xingxue had developed a consciousness after being corroded by the origin black mud that came out of nowhere. However, this was nothing. In the hands of a good person, the black origin soil was a good thing. In the hands of an evil person, the black origin soil was an evil thing. The consciousness born by the Star Cup was something similar to the world's consciousness. However, these people or things affected by the black origin soil would regard Wuming as an enemy. Just like Xiao Ming, who traveled to various worlds but was regarded as a world destroyer. The Star Cup's consciousness and Wuming had a hostile relationship. In short, only one of us can live. Wuming looked at the Star Cup's consciousness. "There's no other way. My heart tells me that I have to kill you." Chapter 448. Then, let's cut the crap and get started. As soon as Wu Ming finished speaking, the magic power in his body erupted, creating a strong hurricane that blew against the land that was already damaged beyond repair. The huge magical power directly caused the sky and earth to change. Large dark clouds formed a cloud tornado that slowly floated above Wu Ming's head. "I will deny the sky, deny the earth, the storm will destroy everything, and the rain will cover everything. With this supreme divine power, I will make everything in heaven and earth bow down to me." Wuming raised one hand and pointed to the sky. As he chanted, the huge cloud tornado in the sky began to roar along with the hurricane, forming a tornado that could tear steel. "Ha!" Wuming shouted and swung his raised arm down heavily. In an instant, a gigantic tornado followed Wu Ming's hand and smashed toward Artemis, who was formed by the consciousness of the Star Cup. Rumble! The tornado collided with the earth and burst out like a big explosion, instantly filling the air with smoke and dust. Whoosh! A winged silhouette flew out of the smoke. It was the Star Cup's consciousness that was using Artethu's appearance. Artemigio, who rushed out of the smoke and dust, was in a mess, as if he had rolled several times on the ground. However, although he looked embarrassed, Wuming was sure that he did not hurt Artemigio. "I didn't expect you to have such powerful power. You really deserve to be called the Root Dragon." Artemigio looked at Wuming with admiration. "I still have a lot of tricks up my sleeve. I'm afraid you won't be able to enjoy them." Wuming also looked at Artemigio. Now, half of Wuming's 12 avatars could not be used because of the previous battle and various other things. Wuming used Gargantuan to attack Artemigio and destroyed his heart. Sun collided with Artemigio's Skystrike. Flood and Annihilation were used to offset the aftermath of Wuming and Artemigio's ultimate move. Wu Ming used Phoenix to save Rick. It could be said that Wu Ming's usual abilities were basically unusable for the time being. However, the remaining 7 avatars were not his usual abilities, and it was enough to make Artemisia suffer. Dragon Seed, Warrior, Vitality, Storm, Ally, Thunder God, and Sorcerer. In addition to Dragon Seed, Vitality, Sorcerer, and Sorcerer, which were semi-passive abilities, whether it was Warrior, Storm, or Thunder God, their power was immeasurable. However, I who has obtained Artemisio's body is not to be trifled with. Artemisio's face instantly became ferocious, and then Artemisio's body rushed straight toward Wu Ming. All evildoers, be afraid of my power. Now I will have the majesty of 10 mountains, the power of 100 rivers, and the strength of 1,000 dragons. The majestic me will raise the fierce mark of the dragon seed. After Wu Ming finished chanting, the stone plate with the dragon carved on it suddenly lit up in his heart at 1 o'clock. Then, Wu Ming's body suddenly agitated, and Wu Ming's body became bigger, and he also faced Artemisio's consciousness. Boom! Wu Ming and Artemisio's consciousness collided, making a loud noise, and the whole land made a miserable sound. It could be said that now, in the southwest of Yar-Ala, the place where Wu Ming and Artemisio's consciousness fought was almost sinking. More than 1,000 meters of smoke and dust filled the air. Then, along with the sweeping of a hurricane, the surrounding dust dissipated, and Artemisio's consciousness lowered its arm that released the hurricane. As expected of the root dragon. To think that you can contend against me in such a situation. The consciousness of the star cup that was using Artethu's appearance showed a rare serious expression instead of the frivolous expression it had before. You're not only using Artemisio's appearance, but you're also using his abilities, right? Wu Ming's voice sounded from the surrounding dust. Wu Ming sensed that the other party was using the same move as Artemisio. If it weren't for the fact that Wu Ming clearly knew that the other party was Artemisio's consciousness, perhaps he would have thought that Artemisio and Wu Ming were fighting. Of course. Artemisio is dead and has returned to the elf corridor. I happen to need a strong body, and it's all thanks to you that you were able to kill Artemisio. After the death of a living species in that world, they would return to the elf corridor. It felt like hell, but it was not quite the same. After Artemisio disappeared, he came to the elf corridor. As a result, Artemisio was swallowed by Artemisio's consciousness in the elf corridor. Wu Ming even suspected that Artemisio's spirit essence had been invaded by Artemisio's body. After being rejected, Artemisio's spirit essence was pulled out. Although it seemed to be placed there, in fact, Wu Ming felt that Artemisio's spirit essence was a means to pave the way for Artemisio's body. As Artemisio's consciousness, it didn't have a physical body, so it could only find a body that matched its identity, which was the body of a divine seed. That was why Artemisio's consciousness could use the defective product that was more powerful than the real one. That was because of Artemisio's power and the power of the root black mud. And the most important thing was Wu Ming's current incarnation, Dragon Seed. A huge, both ferocious and holy white dragon claw stretched out of the smoke, giving the feeling that it could kill Artemisio with just a light squeeze. The huge figure in the smoke shook, and in an instant, a huge white dragon appeared in front of Artemisio's consciousness. That was the power of Dragon Seed, which could turn him into a real fantasy breed dragon. The current Wu Ming was different from his previous incarnation. Originally, the dragon that Wu Ming transformed into was just a kind of dragon in name, but in fact, it was not a dragon. It was just like the golden wolf Bio in the Night of the Sorcerer. It was a wolf, but it was not a wolf. In addition, Wu Ming's dragon seed incarnation had undergone various baptisms for a long time, and the dragon that he transformed into was no longer an ordinary fantasy breed. At least, it was at the level of the fantasy breed king. Feel the power of my incarnation, Wu Ming shouted, and then Wu Ming's huge dragon claw slapped Artemisio's consciousness. At the same time, Artemisio's body, which was controlled by Artemisio's consciousness, frowned a little uncomfortably. Although Artemisio's body could not be seriously injured, it was still the strongest war god so far. Artemisia's physical ability could fight with Wu Ming bare-handed in his current state. Wu Ming now understood why the other party had sealed Arthas's god essence in the throne of the war god temple. Arthas had probably died so that the Star Cup's consciousness could take over his place. This was also part of the other party's plan. I'll let you have a taste of the power of War God in his strongest state. Artemisio's consciousness roared and slammed into Wu Ming's dragon claw. Boom! Chapter 449. In the southwest corner of the continent of Yar, Ayla, what was originally a wasteland had turned into a broken wetland with water constantly flowing in. The reason why the water entered the ground was because the battle between Wu Ming and the consciousness of the Star Cup that was using Arthas' body had caused 2, 3, 4, 5 damages to the ground that was originally penetrated by Desireless Arm. Above the wetland, 2 figures, one big and one small, quickly passed through the sky. They were Wu Ming, who transformed into a dragon, and Artrius, who was controlled by Star Cup. At present, Wu Ming was chasing after Artrius. Wu Ming raised his huge dragon mouth, aimed at the white figure in front of him, and condensed a platinum flame in his mouth, and then he blasted it out. Boom! The flame that seemed to be able to burn everything flew in the air at an extremely fast speed, and the air seemed to be burned, bursting out with a loud explosion. Whoosh! The consciousness of the Star Cup hurriedly dodged, and the exploding white flame directly passed by it and landed on the ground. Boom! A small mushroom cloud rose into the air, setting off a violent hurricane. Star Cup's consciousness was not to be outdone. It pointed at Wu Ming with both hands, and 2 condensed Skystrike energy beams were blasted toward Wu Ming. Wu Ming's huge body at the moment was not suitable for dodging, and Wu Ming was not prepared to do so. Boom! Boom! Wu Ming's 2 huge white dragon claws slapped the 2 incoming Skystrike energy beams, and the 2 Skystrike energy beams were directly sent flying. The energy pillar became like a hard object instead of an energy that would explode upon contact. It was sent flying by Wu Ming. Boom! The Skystrike energy beams, like Wu Ming's white flame, fell heavily to the ground and burst out with a roar, accompanied by a whistling hurricane, and 2 small mushroom clouds rose slowly. Now, it was almost possible to understand why the battle between the 2 could destroy the southwestern part of the continent of Yar, Ayla into a wetland that was close to a new lake and ocean. Gaia couldn't withstand an ordinary attack even if it was a nuclear attack. Wu Ming used his Dragon Seed avatar and fought with Star Cup's consciousness for a few minutes. In just a few minutes, the southwest of Yar Ayla was destroyed like this. Whether it was Wu Ming in his Dragon Seed avatar state, or Artrius, who was controlled by Star Cup's consciousness, it could be seen that those 2 were not ordinary at the moment. First of all, Artrius's body and ability was controlled by Star Cup's consciousness. It could be said that Artrius was completely different from when he fought with Wu Ming. Well, he was not the same person. Previously, Arthu's spirit essence had been sucked out by the Star Cup. No matter how strong he was, he wouldn't be that strong. But now, the Star Cup's consciousness that was using Arthu's body was able to fully display the strongest ability of the war god Artu. Not only could he use Heavenly Strike at will, but he also had the assistance of Star Cup and Black Root Mud, so his energy was unlimited, and his physical strength was also extremely strong. He could fight with Wu Ming in his Dragon Seed avatar state for a while. It was worth mentioning here that Wu Ming and Star Cup's consciousness were fighting in close combat before. However, Star Cup's consciousness found that its attack couldn't cause any significant damage to Wu Ming, so it became a long-range battle in the air. That was because of Wu Ming's first avatar, Dragon Seed avatar. Originally, this avatar only gave Wu Ming the ability of a top-level fantasy-type dragon, as well as an extremely powerful body and the ability to kill dragons. However, whether it was the dragon or the powerful body, Wu Ming's original body was stronger than this avatar. That was why Wu Ming didn't often or basically didn't use this avatar. It was only useful against dragon agents, but the chance of encountering a dragon was too small, and the chance of encountering an enemy related to a dragon was too small. In that case, Wouldn't this incarnation be of little value? The answer must be no. Let's digress first. In theory, the God Slayer won't lose. The God Slayer was a creature that could win even when the winning rate was only 0.001%, and even in a battle where there was no chance of winning, it could still find a way to win. Of course, that was only in theory. If the God Slayer really didn't lose, then there wouldn't be Wu Ming defeating Marquis Warban, Salvatore, Luo Hao, and so on, and there wouldn't be the last king slaughtering the ancient God Slayer. The main reason was that the God Slayer had infinite possibilities. And because of that, none of the God's powers seized by the God Slayer were useless. The God Slayer's power could be continuously developed by the God Slayer, unlike the fixed usage in the game. For example, Salvatore Anthony had the power to regress the technology in a circle centered around him. In the sphere of influence of that power, electrical appliances would be inexplicably cut off, mobile phones would be unusable, and vehicles such as cars and ships would be completely paralyzed. That was because Salvatore didn't use that ability much, and he didn't develop it much. If that ability was a little more ruthless, the technology would regress tens of thousands of years and cover the entire Earth, then the Earth would be finished in less than a few minutes. Therefore, no one should underestimate any power. After Wu Ming studied the Dragon Seed's power, he came up with some ideas. Dragon Seed's avatar was evolved from Camel's avatar, Mechal's dragon-slaying ability, and Wu Ming's original body, the Dragon of Origin. Camel's super physique, Mechal's dragon-slaying ability, Wu Ming's dragon-slaying ability, and the Dragon of Origin's dragon-slaying ability led to this avatar being able to transform Wu Ming into a dragon-slaying dragon, and it was a huge fantasy breed with super physique and defense. Although Wu Ming was regarded as a disobedient god in the world of the God Slayers, because of Wu Ming's particularity, he was regarded as half a God Slayer after slaying a god. As the Dragon of Origin, he had infinite miracles. Wu Ming could naturally evolve his avatar. Some people might ask why that avatar looked like a simplified version of the Dragon of Origin that was closest to Wu Ming's original body. That was not wrong. Because Wu Ming's original body had been unable to leave the Dragon of Origin, Wu Ming prepared such an avatar for that reason. It could be said that except for the time and space ability, which was not as strong as the original Dragon of Origin, it was basically comparable to the original Dragon of Origin. The reason why it was the original Dragon of Origin was because of Wu Ming's current situation. Wu Ming, who was born from the root and absorbed the power of the root, could become stronger as long as he stayed in the root, and Wu Ming was still in the Dragon of Origin. There was no doubt that Wu Ming's original body had become very strong. However, the enemy happened to be Wu Ming's Dragon of Origin, the Black Mud. That thing and Wu Ming restrained each other. It could be said that if there were enough of them, it would not be a problem to kill Wu Ming. Unfortunately, if there were such a huge number of them, then all the worlds would have been destroyed long ago. Because such a huge number could have swallowed all the worlds. It was precisely because there was a strange existence that could restrain Wu Ming and was restrained by Wu Ming that Wu Ming did not dare to go out of the Dragon of Origin casually. If a large number of black mud accidentally invaded the Dragon of Origin, Wu Ming would not be able to break in no matter what. Just like how the black mud attacked Wu Ming when he was inside the Dragon of Origin, Wu Ming was inside the Dragon of Origin and was supported by the power of the Dragon of Origin, so he easily destroyed the black mud. If a large number of black mud invaded the Dragon of Origin, it would be really troublesome. Fortunately, the black mud had been distributed. If Wu Ming had returned to the Dragon of Origin, it was very likely that Wu Ming would be dead by now. Well, luck was also a part of one's strength. Returning to the main topic, the huge white dragon was still chasing after the Star Cup's consciousness. Wu Ming's persistent pursuit made the Star Cup's consciousness feel rather helpless and was on the verge of tears. Chapter 450. The reason why Star Cup's consciousness was being chased by Wu Ming was because Star Cup's consciousness couldn't break through the white dragon scales on Wu Ming's body after using Dragon Seed. The white dragon scales on Wu Ming's body weren't hard. Instead, they were quite tough. When Arthu's attack landed on them, it was like punching cotton. It wasn't very effective. It wasn't that Star Cup's consciousness couldn't break through Wu Ming's defense. If Wu Ming just stood there and let it hit him, it would be fine, but Wu Ming's claws were not to be trifled with, not to mention that he also had other magic spells. Don't forget that after using Dragon Seed Incarnation, Wu Ming's strength was comparable to Wu Ming's body before entering the big source. The root dragon's body was no joke. Therefore, Star Cup's consciousness had only one way, and that was to distance itself from Wu Ming. The consciousness of the Star Cup pulled away from Wu Ming and compressed the Sky Strike and even the God Strike into its palm, presenting a compressed attack. Naturally, Wu Ming's scales were just decorations. That was also the reason why Wu Ming chased after Star Cup's consciousness. Because Wu Ming also knew that was why he kept chasing after it, which led to the current situation. It could be said that if either Wu Ming or Star Cup's consciousness made a mistake, they would suffer a fatal blow. That was the reason why mistakes between masters could be fatal. Damn it! Can't you stop chasing me? Star Cup's consciousness said angrily. Then, Artesius's body merged into space and disappeared. Wu Ming, on the other hand, used his perception to find the place where Artesius appeared through the characteristics of space and time. Although the characteristics of space and time were very weak in the Dragon Seed Incarnation state, it was enough for Wu Ming to catch up with Star Cup's consciousness again. When Star Cup's consciousness controlled Artesius's body to come out of space, Wu Ming was about to touch it again. Star Cup's consciousness had no choice but to continue running. And why did it not come out directly after merging into space? Maybe it was because of the root black mud, which made it subconsciously not run away. That was also the reason why Wu Ming said that only one of them could survive. It was like a battle between old enemies. Although it was very frustrating and weak, it couldn't escape. Do you think I'll let you go when I've already revealed my true form? Wu Ming teased the consciousness of the Star Cup. If Wu Ming didn't use the Dragon Seed, or if Wu Ming didn't use Dragon Seed, Star Cup's consciousness would probably leave this world directly. Wu Ming's consciousness only had power on this planet's body. Wu Ming might not come back, thinking that it was better to avoid trouble. Although Wu Ming promised Artesius to take care of his Skywing species, Wu Ming reckoned that they would very likely return to Artesius after seeing Star Cup's consciousness using Artesius's body. After all, although Artesius had entrusted the Skywing species to Wu Ming, no creature would follow a new master wholeheartedly. In that case, Wu Ming would have to wait until he dealt with the mastermind behind the burning of humanity before he came back to solve this small problem. But then again, this Star Cup's consciousness is really just a consciousness. Wu Ming began to mock Star Cup's consciousness. The expression of Star Cup's consciousness, who was using Artesius's body, also changed. This meant that Wu Ming was right. Although Wu Ming had fought with this Star Cup's consciousness more than a dozen times, the other party did not have any special abilities and had been using Artesius's ability the entire time. Logically speaking, the Star Cup represented the sovereignty of this planet. Holding the Star Cup meant that it was the master of this planet, which was the so-called only God. In that case, shouldn't the consciousness born from the Star Cup be in existence like Gaia? This was also why Wu Ming had used the Dragon Seed when he fought with the other party. It was because only with this clone did Wu Ming have the confidence to fight against such a super powerhouse. In the end, Wu Ming discovered that the other party was not really an existence similar to the suppression power Gaia. It was just a consciousness. It could only use the Star Cup's power to sneak attack Artesius. In other aspects, it still needed to rely on someone else's body to move. Did this not prove that the other party was actually bluffing? If it's really as I think, all you can do now is use Artesius's ability. Wu Ming narrowed his eyes at the other party. In that case, Wu Ming also began to suspect that this consciousness did not belong to the Star Cup. I have to admit, Wu Ming, your intelligence is not lower than mine. The Star Cup's consciousness that was using Artesius's body continued to fly. While dodging Wu Ming's attacks, it said in a dull tone, "It should be because you can't use the power of this world that you exposed yourself." Wu Ming was still following behind the Star Cup's consciousness. He would not stop attacking just because he had a conversation with the other party. You're right. I'm indeed just a consciousness. Without a body, I can't move as I wish. That's why I wanted to instigate Artesius, the most powerful war god. Then, the Star Cup's consciousness became happy. However, I didn't expect him to be such a blockhead. He knew that he would die, but he didn't accept the power. That's just as well. I've helped him by taking out his spirit essence. The Star Cup's consciousness showed a proud expression. This made Wu Ming even more displeased. I'm sure Artesius's soul in the elf corridor is angry that you're using his body. As he spoke, Wu Ming had already started to gather flames in his mouth. Like a heat ray, a fire dragon rushed toward the Star Cup's consciousness. The Star Cup's consciousness was still controlling Artesius's body to dodge. However, because it was a fire ray that was connected to Wu Ming's mouth, the Star Cup's consciousness had a hard time dodging. Then, it was grazed by Wu Ming's white flame. Kaboom! The space fluctuated violently. The other party escaped into space. The remaining flames swept across the ground, or rather, the ground that had turned into a sea made a series of explosions. Due to the excessive power, Wu Ming had already distanced himself from the Star Cup's consciousness after he stopped shooting the flames. Haha. You've finally fallen for it, Wu Ming. The Star Cup's consciousness said proudly. I didn't show it earlier. Insulting Artesius while using his body was enough to make Wu Ming slightly angry. It used this to provoke Wu Ming so that Wu Ming could not stop the flames in time. In other words, Wu Ming had used a skill that required a long time to cast. At the same time, the Star Cup's consciousness controlled Artesius to gather a thin light needle with unknown energy in its hand. It was a divine strike that was even more condensed and mixed with the power of origin. You can condense the divine strike to such a degree. Wu Ming was shocked. Although he had expected Wu Ming to use the divine strike that was mixed with the power of origin to attack Wu Ming did not expect it to be able to condense the divine strike to such a degree. If it was the divine strike, Wu Ming's scales would not be able to block it. This is my advantage as the Star Cup's consciousness and the origin black soil, the Star Cup's consciousness said proudly. Goodbye, Dragon of Origin. The Star Cup's consciousness shouted and threw the divine strike at Wu Ming. The divine strike needle thrown by Artesius' body was quite fast. Wu Ming, who could not use Phoenix for the time being, could not dodge it. The divine strike needle was aimed at Wu Ming's brain. It had to be said that the Star Cup's consciousness was quite high. If it pierced through his heart, Wu Ming would definitely not die. However, if it pierced through his brain, even if he did not die, he would fall into a coma. In this way, Wu Ming would become a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. However, it did not matter what the Star Cup's attack was because Wu Ming was prepared to defend against any kind of attack. No, he could steal it. With a flash of golden light, Wu Ming flew into the sky unscathed. The Star Cup's consciousness looked at Wu Ming in disbelief. How is this possible? Chapter 451. The heaven and earth anomaly that was triggered by the divine striker needle just now gradually disappeared along with the disappearance of the divine striker needle. The sky became gloomy again. Because the sky was gloomy to begin with, and because it was nighttime, the sky seemed even gloomier at this moment. Logically speaking, the divine striker needle released by the Star Cup's consciousness should have hit Wu Ming. However, the divine striker needle disappeared after a flash of golden light, and Wu Ming was completely fine. Checkmate. Wu Ming took advantage of the Star Cup's consciousness shock and flapped his huge wings as he charged toward it. The Star Cup's consciousness quickly recovered from the shock and quickly retreated. He was prepared to use his spatial ability to escape into space and get away from Wu Ming again. He must still have some trump card. The disappearance of the divine striker needle must be related to the opponent's trump card. I don't believe that trump card can be used continuously. If there's another chance, he'll be done for. The Star Cup's consciousness thought as he looked at the huge dragon shadow that was approaching him and smiled proudly. As long as it was not the end, the victor was not certain. Then, he was caught by Wu Ming's dragon claws. Bam! Wu Ming's body, which was controlled by the Star Cup's consciousness, made a sound that resembled the sound of metal colliding. Clank, then the sound of chains could be heard. Golden ripples appeared out of thin air, and a golden chain that seemed to have infinite length extended from it and firmly bound the star cup's consciousness in Wuming's hand. This way, with the heaven lock that was baptized by the origin black mud in the body controlled by the star cup's consciousness could not come out. How is this possible? How can I not use my spatial ability? The star cup's consciousness said in a panic. After a moment of panic, the star cup's consciousness also discovered the problem. Now that he casually looked around, the space around him was filled with tactics that he had never seen before. These tactics covered the surrounding space and extended into the distance. These tactics seemed to have locked the space and were firmly attached to it. Although they were separated by a few meters, an invisible force linked them together. As a result, the surrounding space, or rather, the space in the southwest of the Yar-Ala continent, was locked by these tactics. In short, the space that originally allowed free passage was blocked, or rather, blocked. Why do you think I've been chasing you in this place in the southwest of the Yar-Ala continent instead of going to other places? Wuming said to the star cup's consciousness that was struggling in his claws. Although the chase between the two only took place in the southwest part of the destroyed Yar-Ala continent, it was still not over yet. Firstly, Wuming had purposely trapped Star Cup's consciousness in this place. Secondly, this planet was its palace to Star Cup's consciousness. If it could deal with the enemy in one room, it would naturally not affect the entire palace. After all, no one would choose a plan with less benefits, and the consciousness of the Star Cup was the same. I've been waiting for this moment to come, Wuming said in a final tone. The heavy rain of Star Cup's consciousness fell into the fishing net that Wuming had set up for a long time. Wuming had set up a space lock tactic in the space, and Star Cup's consciousness did not leave this area. In the end, the space lock tactic in the southwest part of the Yar-Ala continent formed a link and formed a magic circle. The magic circle tightly locked the space in the area where Wuming and Star Cup's consciousness were. In mathematical terms, it was 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals infinity. If it was only a single tactic or multiple tactics, Star Cup's consciousness could use Arthas's physical ability to use the spatial ability to escape. However, the space lock in the southwest part of the Yar-Ala continent had already been formed. In addition to the binding of the heaven lock, Star Cup's consciousness could forget about escaping. Impossible? As Star Cup's consciousness, how could I not discover these tactics that you've set up? Although Star Cup's consciousness did not have much combat power, Star Cup's consciousness could be said to be unprecedentedly powerful in terms of perception, investigation, and so on. No matter what, it was still the consciousness of the planet's sovereign key. Naturally, its spiritual power should be able to detect these tactics. Due to anger, Star Cup's consciousness used its spiritual power to scan the tactics. In the end, it discovered something unusual. The tactics were originally hidden. This was something that both Wuming and Star Cup's consciousness knew. Now, these tactics were revealed because they had been activated. Other than that, when Star Cup's consciousness scanned these tactics, it discovered that there were other tactics mixed in with these space lock tactics. It was because of these other tactics that Star Cup's consciousness did not notice the existence of these space lock tactics. Those are tactics that can block perception? Star Cup's consciousness was completely shocked. That's right. There were some shielding tactics mixed in with the space lock tactics. These shielding tactics were like the space lock tactics. They were linked together and formed a magic circle. It was these shielding tactics magic circles combined with the space lock tactics magic circle that caused Star Cup's consciousness to be captured by Wuming. Even if it's you, it's impossible for you to have a tactic that can block my perception. As the planet's sovereign key's consciousness, it was impossible for its spiritual power not to notice anything. Also, why did my divine firing needle disappear? How many trump cards are you hiding? Star Cup's consciousness seemed to have gone crazy at the moment. It gave off a feeling that it was at the end of its road and would definitely die. However, Wuming did not say anything else. You don't need to know about this. Return obediently and apologize to Arthas. As Wu Ming spoke, a trace of lightning and wind appeared on the dragon claw that was holding the Star Cup's consciousness, as well as an invisible source of power. After all, Star Cup's consciousness that had the origin black soil had to be dealt with using origin power. Sizzle sizzle. Lightning crackled. Countless divine lightnings surged out of Wu Ming's body. Whoosh whoosh. The raging storm was mixed in with the thunder and lightning. Two different forces converged on Wu Ming's dragon claw that was holding Star Cup's consciousness. No! You can't do this. I am Star Cup's consciousness. I can help you gain control of this planet. Star Cup's consciousness seemed to be aware of its death and frantically begged for mercy. On the contrary, Wu Ming felt a bit strange. Arthas was a wise man. Other than that, Wu Ming didn't think that destroying Arthas' body would kill it. Boom! Wu Ming didn't waste any more time and directly crushed the clone's body with the power of Thunder God's avatar and Storm's avatar. The voice of Star Cup's consciousness stopped abruptly. Wu Ming looked at Star Cup that was revealed and looked at it vigilantly. He constantly scanned it with his spiritual power, but he didn't find the existence of Star Cup's consciousness. Is it really dead? Wu Ming wondered. Of course, it wasn't that simple. In the distance, the current capital of the Forest Elves, Temple of Canas. In the Temple of Canas, where the Forest Elves worshipped, with a stream of light, a green figure with burning flames appeared. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.